Welcome to my video on 2003's Kill Bill Volume 1. I'm going to start the video with a review that's going to have zero spoilers, and then we'll get into what I call the thoughts section, where I discuss this movie with a lot of spoilers for the entire movie, not for... If I decide to spoil anything else, Tarantino, or anything else for that matter, I will verbally warn before I do so, and probably like hold up an index finger while I'm spoiling, so you can mute and skip ahead and choose to see me lower my index finger. The movie is rated R, hard R, so will this video be. And I kind of fucking love this one. Yeah, so, couple of things. Women's History Month, so that is indeed why I'm doing this and part 2. I haven't decided yet if I'm doing part 2 1 week from now or 2 weeks from now, and that is because my fool ass forgot how many Sundays there were in this month. I thought that this would be the last 2 weeks, the last 2 Sundays of this month, but yes, yeah, we'll see exactly, but if all goes as planned, then by the end of this month, I will have done a video on Volume 2. And I will, of course, discuss the aspects of this movie where it is especially interesting from feminist perspective, for good or ill. And yes, I did indeed plan for, last month. It was Jackie Brown. I'm doing, right, for those who don't know, I'm doing a Tarantino movie per month. At least one per month this month, too. And, yeah, I appreciate that he did make his, the movie he made that fits for Black History Month before the two he made that fit especially well for Women's History Month, of the ones he's made, I mean. And I have not... So, before I continue, I should say I have already watched Volume 2. And I'm not going to spoil it in this video, but I will talk a little bit about how, so originally this was supposed to be one movie, and then it was split in half with Hattori Hanzo Steel. You'll understand that when you watch the movie, and I hope you will. The unless there's some aspect of it that would bother you, obviously. But yes, I will discuss that at some point in this video. And I have not watched the whole bloody affair, which is what I believe re-edit is appropriate. I will admit, there was a while where I was like, wait, why are they just stitching the two movies together without changing anything? Because sometimes I don't think things through. I try to. I really don't want to be like Trump. But maybe you're surprised I got this political this soon, but hopefully by now you're not surprised that I got political. But yeah, eventually I did hear they added some stuff for that one. I am not ruling out at some point watching it. Right now, it would basically have to be that there would be an official DVD release. I have heard that there is apparently an unofficial one. I don't really want to fuck with that, honestly. So that's, yeah. For a while, I wasn't sure if it was gonna go to Danish theaters, let alone one near me. It has, or will, I forget if it has already premiered or not. Right now, I'm sorry to say, there is no way my back can handle sitting still for that long in one position, or as close to one position as, like, the theaters do have some, the chairs allow for some adjustment, but right now, not going to happen. So, I am not promising that I will ever be able to do the whole bloody affair. If there is an official DVD release, which I've heard from someone is at this point very unlikely, but if it happens and it gets on sale, not getting it if it's not on sale. I rarely pay full price for things that might eventually end up on sale. But then I will get it, and I will do a video talking about it. But if you are just jonesing for a video discussing the whole bloody affair, let's see, I believe it was Schnee who did one, and that was a really, really compelling video. I didn't watch it more than once, and not since it first came out. I'm gonna try really hard not to restate here anything that they said in their video. If I accidentally do, please know I absolutely do not mean to just be repeating, much less like, I don't know, does it even count as, would it count as plagiarism if I did, because like his channel is bigger than mine? I don't know exactly, but certainly I'm gonna try not to, and I certainly don't mean to. Just sometimes my memory really struggles to keep apart things I thought of myself and things I heard other people say. Now, as far as I try to once per video do a leftist YouTube video recommendation. This, and since it is Women's History Month, I'm trying to make it, women. It feels somewhat appropriate to be recommending Alice Capel's Epstein's Secret Life in Paris, since, he was quite the misogynist, among other fucked up things, and the movie does, among other things, explore misogyny. And I would feel remiss if I did not also recommend Broy Deschanel's video on Pulp Fiction, the title of which I'm afraid escapes me at the moment, and I'm not going to be looking up very much at all. As I record this video, it's going to have to be what I remember because my wrists are sore. And as usual, I will try to build off what I said in other videos on Tarantino, because otherwise we would be here all day if I had to restate everything, as I sometimes did in my older videos. And I think that does... Right, so last bit of preamble is that I am going to try to be very careful when I discuss some of the topics here, because I do not belong to any of the minority groups that are most directly affected by the issues. I base all that I say on what I've heard members of those communities say, particularly leftist members. There is a Google Doc link in the description box to where there is a list of, as of now is unfortunately incomplete, but a lot of the voices that I have learned the most from, arranged by the minority groups that they belong to hopefully make it easier to find. Please do not only listen to me, a cishet white man, talking about, so among the things here is East Asian culture, women's issues. There is some other... I think I will talk some about, because certainly, as usual, it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, so the issue of Black identity, perhaps especially Black American identity, is also going to come up. And I think that does pretty much... I am familiar with a lot of the various pop culture references here. I think this was the first time that I, watched, when watching a Tarantino movie, where I was like, oh shit, that's from that. And yeah, The rest of them, I will try to not make assertions that I will try to speak to the reputation. Cultural osmosis, I'm aware of some of these things. It feels bad to say out loud, but I will admit I am not as familiar with East Asian cinema as clearly Tarantino is. I did catch the Bruce Lee reference, the most overt. There might be more than one. And I'm afraid I have not yet watched that movie. I have watched 3 Bruce Lee movies, and I am intending to do videos on those of his movies that I own. But yeah, it's real quick. Enter the Dragon, The Big Boss. God damn it! What was the last one? Shit. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I forget the name right now, but the third Bruce Lee movie that I have watched is the one with Chuck Norris. But yeah. I think, yeah, I suppose that does also briefly bring up, so there is a school of thought that says that only East Asians should be making movies that are this heavily inspired by the culture, whether it is directly reflecting the culture. And, I believe the term is culture vulture. That accusation has been directed at Tarantino. Before this, it was primarily for African-American culture. And I am not qualified to speak on it, so I will just briefly note, certainly I can appreciate the idea that, maybe the people making money and getting a name, getting a lot of positive attention off something as, specific and with so much history as the various East Asian cultures. To be clear, I'm not saying East Asian just because I don't remember the movie has both Japanese and Chinese culture. That's why I'm using the blanket term. And I appreciate that is, I know that the Japanese and the Chinese have some really negative history with each other. So I am not saying that there is some monoculture there. I am merely referring to the geographical, anyway, an argument could be made that it should only be that the money, the positive attention and such should go to the people who are, of those cultures. And, at this, so again, I'm not making excuses here. I'm not making a definitive statement because that is not, I do not know enough about it to say. But obviously, one counter-argument would be that there are a number of East Asian individuals working on it, including absolute legends. I have to admit, I am not really familiar with other Sonny Chiba work. I think I primarily know his name from being referenced by Tarantino, but yeah, the oh, and I have watched Battle Royale. This has at least one actor from it. I even rewatched it very recently. I guess I'll briefly give a little bit more bona fides. I have watched some of Ang Lee's work, including Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I think the other thing that I could say there is technically, yeah, I don't want to give that away. I'll talk about it in the thoughts section. This movie was the first that I watched in theaters by Tarantino. And ever since, I have made sure to watch every time that it's a new one. You know, the whole Buddy Affair is the only of his that has gone to theaters since, you know, as of and including this one, that I have not watched. And if he does at some point make another one, yeah, I will watch it and do a video on it. And that's, you know, when this came out, I had very recently gotten into his work, and I had watched everything he had made before this one. And it really was an amazing experience. Like, that is, you know, I understand not wanting to support him too much. I'm not making excuses for his, like, political opinions. And I think it was Nando V Movies, or Nando cut one of his channels, where he pointed out, what the fuck is Tarantino's problem with fucking Paul Dano? Like, what a weird thing to, like, I don't know. I can kind of you know, many of us could kind of understand if it was like, okay, yeah, that actor, you know, kind of overrated. They're not really that good. But fucking Paul Dano, what the fuck, man? What have you been watching? Oh, are you basing it like purely on Taking Lives? I'll acknowledge that's not his best work, but motherfucker. The Batman, Prisoners, There Will Be Blood? Are you fucking kidding? How do you hate Paul Dano? I truly do not. I'm not making any kind of excuses for that. That is just, yeah. And I don't know if this is his best, but it is one of my favorites. And yes, you know, I think it'll probably be at the end of the last video I do on, so, you know, the ones that I haven't already done are the ones I'm doing. I'm not doing new videos on the ones that I did videos on when I first watched them. So the last one is Inglourious Bastards. When I do that video, I intend to do a full ranking of every movie that he's written and or directed. And yeah, like, this was such an emotionally engaging one, you know, and I'm going to try over the course of this video to give you an idea of why. That's what we in the business call a tease. So, I'm not going to give too much away about the setup, but it is a revenge story, and I really appreciate how different in some ways this is. I think that is part of why I love it so much. Like, we already, like, with Tarantino, there's always something that takes you by surprise the first time you watch one of his movies, no matter how many you've already watched. But this was the first one where I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even know he could fucking do that. And I really appreciate him, you know, stepping outside of his comfort zone in some ways here. I wouldn't say that everything works out 100%, but there is certainly a significant amount of it that does. Probably most. And yeah, we once again have a non-linear timeline. And that is not even remotely a spoiler, because it is set up basically immediately. Like, you are not very many minutes into it the first time, you get a very clear indication that there is something that has, yeah. And yeah, it's one of the ones where, you know, I think by this point, Tarantino really wanted to do these stories where, like, a mainstream audience is almost immediately going to be invested, because, like, as great as, you know, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are, and also Natural Born Killers, but I appreciate he, you know, a lot was changed for that one. But with those, you know, yeah, they're great movies, but if you are not already on board, some of the major characters are really gonna put you off if you're not already, you know, I mean, those are love letters to B movies, and a number of B movies don't, they're not really about like, okay, here's someone, here's the person you like. It's just, oh, here, this is the person you hate the least. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just not very mainstream is what I'm saying. Not for America anyway. But with True Romance, Jackie Brown, and this, like, yeah, you just immediately like, okay, I'm not making excuses for everything this character says and does, but I want them to succeed. This is something that has to, you know, and, oh, right, shit. Why did I forget to mention fucking From Dusk Till Dawn? That one, you know, kind of falls somewhat into both. You know, that one's a good mix of the two. There are characters that you really want to see come out on top, and then there are ones that you are not necessarily, you know, yeah, I have made my point, and I'm moving on. The psychological accuracy is quite the strength here. We are immediately, you know, we understand what's going on with the protagonist, and basically, I've shown this to other people, and I've only ever witnessed 2 reactions from half a dozen people that I showed it to who have very varied taste in film. And yes, I did warn all of them. None of them were, like, unaware that it was going to be violent. Most of them were like, I really want to see this play out. I hope the protagonist wins. One of them did say that while they understood, they could not really support what the protagonist was doing. But none of them said that they just didn't think that the revenge was deserved, or that they didn't understand why. Like, because that's, if you're doing a straight revenge story, and I'm not saying in all ways that that's what this is, but, you know, like, if you're trying to make a more complex revenge story, then it could work. But for something like this, it worked really well that we are so much on the side of the person seeking the revenge. The authenticity is an interesting, because, like, there is so much here where it's like, okay, you went to this place, and some of the time they actually did. And then other times there's stuff where it's like, this is not set in the real world, is it? But it always stays true to itself, as, you know, I would argue everything Tarantino does. The level of detail is also tremendous. This is one of the ones where he best does that and gets so much varied texture. You know, so most of what I'm saying in this video is not really a criticism of his other work either. I'm just comparing and contrasting. But, you know, before this, yeah, you know, big city, you know, stories about organized crime and the various ups and downs in these, yeah. And then with this one, you have American culture, Japanese culture, Chinese culture, and the characters, like, it informs so much how there are different experiences within these cultures. Yeah. And the tone is also really expertly done. The way that it can go between deadly serious and something that is objectively silly. And I think I have said this before, but it does bear repeating. Tarantino, earnest in his filmmaking. You know, there is not really this, ironic detachment. Like there's some remixing. You know, he has opinions about the media that he is drawing from, but he's not trying to wink and nudge at the audience and say, I get that this is a little, you know, not everyone is you know, there's that that thing some have attributed to the MCU. I'm afraid I forget which YouTuber recently pointed out that's not actually said in the MCU. That's from something else, but yeah. That just happened. You know, those 3 words as a line of dialogue is, yeah. And I do appreciate the fact that those exact 3 words in that exact order, unlike I Am Groot, have not been spoken in the MCU. Does not mean that there are not lines of dialogue, many, too many, that fit that are summed up very nicely with that. There is a reason that accusation has stuck. You know, the first time I heard that was years ago, and people are still saying it. And I'm not saying they should stop until the MCU stops doing that. I'm not saying you have to wait until the... I mean, at some point, obviously, the MCU is not going to last forever. Nothing does. I think that does pretty much cover the... So yeah, the dialogue, this is once again one of the ones where I have to acknowledge that I do not speak some of the languages spoken here. So I can only judge those dialogue lines by the translation into Danish subtitles. I can't really judge the delivery or how it was, you know, how it comes across in the original language, you know. And also, if at some point I say something in this video where you're like, that's not what that character said, like, it's possible that I'm just like purposely making a joke, rewording it slightly or something on purpose. Yeah. But it is also possible that it's because the Danish subtitles do not agree with the English subtitles, because there's a behind the scenes on the DVD, which is worth watching. It's like 21 minutes, where they show some clips, and at one point in the movie, I believe it's Japanese is spoken, and Uma Thurman is referred to in the English subtitles as yellow-haired, and in Danish as golden-haired, and that is not the same thing. So yeah, and I think there was at least one other thing, but I think that illustrates it well. And but yeah, the dialogue, you know, certainly everything said in English, you know, Tarantino maintains the style, which I have already talked about, but it is just nice that it is still very much present, and he is still toying with language. Like, Tarantino writes dialogue that you remember and you find yourself quoting. You know, at one point, the bride, Uma Thurman's character, says, you know, she's talking about, like, how could it be, you know, how could things be made even? And she doesn't just say even, she says even Steven. And there's a part where a character says, so this other character said this to me, and then it cuts to that other character saying those exact words, you know. And that's just the kind of thing that there's so much of Hollywood that would not dare do something like, because it calls attention to itself. Like, you immediately pick up on, you know, that's that exact, and it's fun, you know, seeing someone, because so much of the time you either just don't see exactly what the other character said, because, like, they, you know, a lot of Hollywood screenwriters would tell you it's not very economical, you don't have to show it twice, you know, kind of thing. Or you'll see it and you realize, oh, they kind of reworded it, and that can also work. Maybe they reworded it in a way that says something about the various characters. Maybe they don't want, you know, like, if you are repeating something someone else said, whether or not you reword it, like, it might come down to memory. But the character here, you get the sense that character has a good memory. And when that is the case, it can speak to how much they respect the other one, or at least those words that they give it exactly, or how much they respect the person they're talking to. that they're quoting something to. And yeah, just like with Tarantino, it never ever feels like he just had someone say something for no good reason. Like, it all feels like there is thought put behind it. As far as direction goes, this is one of the ones where Tarantino really pushes himself. And again, there is an issue where I'll talk about it before I get into spoilers, but there is at least one thing where I do think he didn't completely stick the landing. But it really is very impressive how much there is of Japanese and Chinese culture here, and how well he is able to meld all this into what, like, it becomes this sort of melting pot. And that's something where it's the kind of thing where if you don't know that much about the various cultures presented here, you might feel like, oh, there is basically just one culture, one Kill Bill culture, and it is made up of these different ones. But if you know a lot about those cultures, you'll be able to, piece together, oh, this is from this, and that's from that, and this third thing, and that's very difficult to do because, and this is something, I'll admit I didn't always know. A lot of white people still don't know, and I don't know if this movie is necessarily the best for learning that from, but there are significant distinctions to be made between Chinese and Japanese culture. And I think that is about... Yeah, that does bring us nicely into the cinematography, which a lot of the way is Tarantino expanding his visual language from what he had directed before this in ways that mostly work. There are still some long takes and tracking shots and such, but here, more than before, the tracking shots felt very De Palma. And he himself, yeah, and to be clear, I'm not just saying that because he specifically mentions De Palma in the behind the scenes. I picked up on it myself. I've watched enough De Palma. And yes, more videos. At some point I will get to more because I do have at least a few more movies of his on DVD. And God, I miss talking about De Palma. Yeah, I'm not saying he always gets it exactly right, but he is always fucking interesting. And when he gets it right, it's hard for me to put into words how much I'm looking forward to doing a video on Scarface. Now, I think, yeah, other than that, some of the, stuff here, I certainly also felt like there was at least some Sergio Leone going on. I forget if it was for this one or the second one because I have already reread the trivia for both, but there was a reference to, let's see, was it? I have it right here. I believe it was A Fistful of Dollars. Maybe it was a few dollars more. It was one of the Dollars trilogy, and it was not The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah, I'm quite the fan of Leone in general, especially the Dollars trilogy, especially Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But yeah, those first two, retroactively added to the, it wasn't originally a trilogy. There's just some, I think it was a marketing decision. It's like, well, Clint Eastwood plays a role in all three. Let's just make it the same character. And it's not entirely unproblematic to do so for reasons that I don't think I'm going to go into here, but they're well documented. It's easy for you to find out if you didn't know that there was that. I am considering covering some movies because I do own several of his movies as well. I need to think about it. I'm not making any promises right now. Now but yeah, close up, extreme close up on eyes as this sort of like, okay, this person and that person are in conflict, and yeah, I definitely wanted to underline the so essentially every movie he's made so far, Tarantino makes sure there is some sense that this is a world where there could be violence at any time. This is the first where the violence is so spread out over the course of it. You know, we do still have like conversations and such, to be sure, but something I noticed here is that some of the time the conversation will be right before or after an act of violence in a way that some of the earlier ones he made, you know, we don't need it. It's not a criticism, but I did notice that was less the case in some of those, and it works incredibly well to make that change here. And one of the reasons is how motivated it is by the themes and the world that this is set in. And the editing. Sally Minky. Not all heroes wear capes. Fantastic work, as usual. I guess I'll briefly note. So it cuts at a very specific... The movie ends, cuts the... Yeah. Leaves us with a, in anticipation of Volume 2, at a very deliberate point, which, from what I understand, I already said, they decided over the course of making it that they would split it into, and they did a really solid job picking. Like, I'm not saying it's 100%. Like, I do remember watching it and being like, we have to wait, months to get Volume 2, but it's certainly, it's the kind of thing where it could have been really, really obnoxious, but, and yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just the fact that this was a case where, I mean, there are some movies that you just could not, split into, even though they are long on their own, and yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I would say there's anywhere in, my dad and I recently rewatched the Tarkovsky masterpiece, Andrei Rublev, one of his masterpieces, and that one certainly, I have no idea where you would like split that thing in half, and that one is about 3 hours. From what I recall, it's been way too fucking long. I need to rewatch Solaris, but from what I recall, that one also just, I would not know where to do the cut. But other than that, yeah, throughout, really, really striking editing, striking visuals, and some of it is from the way things are cut. And it is also one of the ones, perhaps the most of, as far as Tarantino, no, okay, it's saying problems with the, I hope it doesn't mean that it's too bad quality. Apologies, there's just not really anything I can do. I will at some point get another computer, which is hopefully not going to have this problem. Anyway, this still sometimes lingers, but it feels less indulgent than certainly the most recent of Tarantino's work, and sometimes the ones before this could also, and part of it is also just like how focused this is, like, especially like one of the main things when people hear the name Tarantino, the first movie they think of, for a long time, and for some still, Pulp Fiction. And that one has a, more of a ensemble cast, and this one is very much about the bride and at least one other character that I don't think I want to give away exactly. But yeah, it is all, and that makes sense, because she is undeniably the protagonist here. The bride is. It is her revenge story, and that means that every time we see her, like, we see her in various contexts, and it always informs that specific, like you every single scene. And to be clear, I'm not saying she is in all of the scenes, but when she isn't there, there is a reason for it, and we understand why we're still seeing it. And I would say by the end of Pulp Fiction, we understand everything we've seen, but there are scenes where the first time you see it, before the ending, you don't fully realize why did we see that? What was that about? And I'm not necessarily saying that this is better than that. I think both are interesting. I'm glad that he's done both, because there is a significant, like, please try it yourself. Watch these two movies in close proximity to each other, and then tell me that you don't get a different, that it doesn't have a very different impact like that. This is probably the most propulsive movie that he had made up to this point. Like, there really is just this, yeah, yes. And the production value is fucking amazing. Like, you really, some of these, yeah. Yes, it actually, let me just go over. So, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup are all on point. Everything looks like it cost what it should. No corners were cut. And it informs about the characters. You might see where someone lives or works or that sort of thing. You might, or maybe just what place they go to if they have time off or that sort of thing. And yeah, you really just, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me personally, this has some of the most gorgeous of both sets and locations. Just like, you drink it in, and that's, again, because it's Tarantino, every so often you do get a shot that just stays still and just lets you really appreciate the fucking beauty of some of these. Sometimes it's natural, sometimes it is, yeah, this was built by people, but my God, it looks amazing. I think this might be the first Tarantino movie where I was like, you know what? I would live in this place. And I'm not, oh shit, is that problematic to say? I'm not saying like a fucking colonizer or something. I mean, it looks so fucking good. And from what I understand from people who know, at least some of it is drenched in the culture of, some of it is Japanese, some of it is Chinese. And the music, I have spoken before about how his soundtracks are always fucking amazing. This one might be my favorite. If I was going to own just one Tarantino soundtrack, it would probably be this one. And the way that this uses the different cultures, I thought it was expressed perfectly in the behind-the-scenes documentary. There is at least one piece of music here that borrows from some East Asian culture, yeah, and also, and this is gonna sound so ridiculous if you haven't already heard it, but Ennio Morricone, who I am so happy that Tarantino, he went back to the well on that one. The Hateful Eight, also Morricone, yeah, and it works so unbelievably well. And this was the first time that Tarantino had some original music made. All the previous ones that he directed, all three of them, he would choose music that already existed and use in a compelling way. And it's still used in a compelling way. And there is still some original, one of the first, I guess the first piece of music you hear in this is, licensed. But the original score, my God. And also the fact that, yes, both original score and licensed here. No, but some will use, East Asian musicians, for example. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that this also has, in part because of the music, but also the editing, one of the most, and the cinematography, one of the most parodied and referenced scenes of Tarantino's career. And the sound design. I really appreciate... So there is a... This one has the kind of exaggerated, sound effects of these, East Asian martial arts films. And I really appreciate that that's not like... Tarantino did not want to do that every single time. It appears, and it's enough that you pick up on, okay, that was not an accident. That was not somebody clicked the wrong button. There was enough of that, enough instances of those sound effects that it's very clear. But I'm not sure it would have worked for every time that they could have used it. And yeah, they don't use it constantly, It doesn't play out 100% like one of those martial arts films, at least not the ones that I've watched, because that's not what Tarantino wants to do. And other than that, yeah, as usual, like these gnarly sounds when there is violence, which, as mentioned, is frequent in this. And yeah, and that's another thing. Like, no, yeah, I will talk about that later in this video. But yeah, that brings us to the characters, and I have to say, I think, for me at least, this has some of the greatest antagonists in anything Tarantino has written or directed, and I mean that both in reference to the sheer fucking number of them for a movie that's like 100 minutes, but also, and how many of them actually get personality, not just like faceless goons and such, but also how fucking despicable they are. Like, my God. I love to hate the antagonists of this movie. And I really appreciate how several of them are given aspects where you can kind of, like, you don't necessarily ever think, oh, okay, they're justified then, but you do find yourself, I certainly find myself thinking, oh, I mean, that's closer to a redeeming quality than a lot of, American movies that are this centered on revenge would allow. And so you don't spend that much time with all, but this does have, so, excuse me, I just forgot to breathe. In Pulp Fiction, there is a reference. There's a bit where they talk about something called Fox Force 5. And here, I mean, it's not 100% exactly what was, described there, but it's pretty clear. Like, yeah, eventually Tarantino did go ahead, took 10 years, but almost 10 years, but he did go ahead and actually make something that clearly takes inspiration from his idea there, and we don't spend a huge amount of time with all of them, but by the end, you have a idea of at least most of them, and certainly by the end of the second one, you feel like you know all of them. And I really appreciated how much, like, that's one of the things, it can be difficult to put a lot of variety in such, because, like, it's a group of people who do the same thing. you know, and work for the same person. So it can be difficult. That's something I've especially noticed with, in some fictional stories that are about like a military kind of thing. Like, yeah, sometimes it's difficult to make the different members of the group stand out. And as usual, Tarantino really nails it. Like, I have met people who have not watched the movie in the 20 years, but once I or that person says just a few words about one of these members of the group, immediately the other one of us knows exactly what character is being talked about. Because it's one of those things. I am a big believer in the school of thought that if you are going to have multiple characters in a place where hypothetically you could have just one, because like if you really wanted to, this could be a story of one person seeking revenge against one other person. That exists. There are revenge stories, some of them amazing, that are just where it's only just the one, and like maybe maybe they have to take out some goons along the way or something, but it is specifically this one other person that they are going after. That can, for example, be a way to really focus a movie, a story. It doesn't have to be a movie. But here, I do think it was the right choice that there are multiple. And yeah, if you're going to do that, they should be more different from each other. If you have multiple characters that serve the exact same purpose in your story, might be an idea to just combine them. Like I've said this before, but one of my examples of that is how in the first Thor movie, and I don't think the second one changes much, certainly the third one doesn't, we didn't need... I appreciate they're from the comic. And in comics, you can spend more time, because you have much more time than a feature-length film. But the Warriors 3 might as well basically just be one person, possibly even make it Sif, because like there's room for an interesting dynamic, but they never quite managed to deliver on. There's room for an interesting dynamic with Thor, Jane, and Sif. But the Warriors 3, like, I'm not saying there's nothing fun there. I like those actors, perhaps especially, this, I'm gonna make sure I get his name right. Give me a second. Ray Stevenson. R.I.P. Yeah. But it didn't need to be 3 people, or 4 if you count Sif. And here you have even more than 4. That rhymed. And I feel 100% like, even though by the end of this one, I still don't know all of them, it still left me feeling like, yeah, it was the right choice to have this many. And it's also not too many. It doesn't feel like he's just like, I don't know, 5, that's a number that is appealing to some people, No, it really is, yeah, yes. And there are, in general, I would say every major character has just enough clear definition. Like you can remember something about them even years down the line, and you feel like they are different, even though many of them are working, a lot of them are working within the same basic world, and a bunch of them are working for the same person or people. So it could easily end up not that. And the acting, as usual, this is a great display of the talent of the various ones. I knew that I had to watch more Uma Thurman after this. I already liked her, but this is perhaps also one where you really get why, Tarantino really loved working with her. He really saw something in her and was able to, they together, they were able to bring it out. And I guess it's going to be basically no particular order, but yeah, Daryl Hannah, this is one of my favorite. For Uma, it is my favorite. Honestly, for many of them, it is my favorite work of theirs. But yeah, Daryl Hannah, so cool. And this was not like the high point of her. This period was not when she was the biggest name. I forget the exact, I believe it was the 80s, because that's when she did Splash and Blade Runner. Yeah. And yeah, I've always found her compelling to watch. But yeah, this, yes. And I guess some of these I won't say too much about. Vivica A. Fox, definitely my favorite work of hers. I have never in my life been bored watching Vivica A. Fox perform. This Alias 1-800-Missing, was that what it was called? That show about the psychic who finds missing people. You know, um, Independence Day, honestly, and that's not even, I don't even particularly like that movie on the whole, but yeah, just always, yeah. And that was actually in the behind the scenes, they talk about how, Tarantino suddenly realized, oh, hey, I haven't actually seen Vivica A. Fox since Independence Day. And so he cast her in this, and in that she talks about how she had been warned, Tarantino, he's really going to push you, it's going to go, and she was happy about how, the bloodier and sweatier she got, the more he was like, amazing, and yeah, like she's so fucking good here. Like just, if I had not already been a fan of hers, this would have made that happen. And I think I'm gonna also briefly go into, Lucy Liu. I'm not gonna claim that I've watched everything of hers, but I have watched stuff she's made across decades. I am afraid I forget what it's called right now, but it's easy enough to find out. She did a short with Darren Aronofsky. I've watched her, both of the Charlie's Angels movies. I was a fan of all three actresses back then. I mean, I guess I still am, but that was the peak of my fandom. I watched everything I could get my hands on of their work. And she was also great. She's great in all of these. She was also great in the second Shazam movie. I acknowledge that movie's not like the best thing ever, but yeah. And this is the standout for me of her, of what I've watched of hers. And it really is just, you cannot take your eyes off her character every time she's on screen. There is such force there. The mere presence of her. She can be walking, she can be sitting or standing, and it's just like, yeah, every step of the way. It's, yeah, fantastic. So the pacing here is somewhat more, I mean, I already mentioned that it's more propulsive than than what he had directed before. Yeah, it definitely is very much, it is telling one very specific story, slightly out of order, but it is that, I suppose in that way it's less like something like Pulp Fiction than Reservoir Dogs and True Romance, of the ones that are perhaps the most Tarantino-esque. And yeah, From Dusk Till Dawn, also Natural Born Killers. If I know he's not the biggest fan of when people talk about how that's technically originated, that, yeah, as his script. Jackie Brown as well. And well, I'm just mentioning fucking movies now. Anyway, the special effects here. So this was, by this point he had fully embraced doing, some of the earliest stuff. There were not as many effects as perhaps might be expected from what we're seeing. But by this point, very much, he was not really holding back on that, and I think it works incredibly well. There is at least one very specific thing in this that I don't think I want to give away, because I was very happy that I did not know it going in, but it is something I'm not sure you'll ever really forget after seeing. Maybe I'll put it at the start of the thought section so you'll know if you really badly want to know. But it also uses some of the classics. So if you imagine that the camera is the camera, my camera is the camera. So imagine if this is the body of a character and this hand represents a sword, then they do the thing where, so, you cannot see what's in here. So they do the thing where you see from that point of view, the sword goes like this, and then the actor turns around and you see that there is a cut where the sword would have cut. And of course, if you know enough about the movie business, like, yeah, the cut was already there before they started filming, and they're just acting out that the cut was made just now. But it's a classic, and it's great to see in a piece of media that doesn't really need it, because one of the things that it does is saves money. It was necessary for some of these, like cheap B movies and such, because like if you can only show a character being cut if you're showing the actual effects shot, like someone has to do like the prosthetic and make something that can be cut, on camera, that might limit how many characters you can show being cut. And you don't necessarily want that, because the audience is there for a lot of, blood is compulsory. If you haven't already watched, Ian Danskin recently uploaded to YouTube for the first time in some time. It was great to see. I'm aware that he's done some shorts on Nebula. I think I might watch them at some point. I'm quite the fan of his. I would love to see him return to more like long form, but his video Blood is Compulsory is fantastic. Even if I remember the most recent video he's made, he talks about what videos were fun to make and which were not. And I'm afraid right now I forget, but I think Blood is Compulsory might have been one of the ones that weren't as fun as he had hoped. But yeah, the video, it's something like A Guide to Crashing Out. But yeah, I think that does bring us to the action. So this is the most straight action movie that Tarantino had directed up to this point. I have not yet watched Death Proof, but I do own it, and I will do it, well, yeah, I guess, was that about a month? It was sometime during the next month, yes. I plan to do it. So I can't speak to that one. Certainly a case could be made for something like Inglourious Basterds. Maybe also some of the other more recent ones, but this one, like, yeah, it has the flair of Tarantino, but if someone just described a bunch of scenes of this and just gave some details, and didn't say it was Tarantino, you might think, oh, so it's just a regular action movie, essentially, And while, again, I do, I'm not sure I would say that I love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but other than that, I love his work. And once again, I have not yet watched Death Proof. But, it is not necessary for the other ones. But the other ones, as mentioned, they create a world where it feels like there could be violence, but there isn't necessarily, like, as much violence as there is here. And in this one, like, yeah, I'll briefly, so in some of the other ones, yeah, people might like scuffle. Sometimes people might shoot at each other. But it tends to be this thing of like, there's some buildup, and then very briefly people will shoot at each other, and some will die, some will live. That's, of course, more like how it happens in the real world when people unfortunately shoot at each other. I wish no one would. But yeah, this one, in some ways is this martial arts revenge film. So fights are more carefully choreographed without feeling like, like, that's the thing. He strikes this balance. You can tell, okay, thought was put into this. This is meant to look as cool as it does. But it doesn't feel like, okay, I'm just watching people perform action. It feels visceral, and I thought it worked incredibly well to have this action that is genuinely aesthetically pleasing and like gets your heart rate up. Really, yeah, it's something you watch and you're like, wow. But also, as usual, he does use graphic violence to underline, oh hey, this is fucked up. This is not something you would want to happen to yourself or anybody that you care about. And again, hopefully you wouldn't want it upon anyone. But yeah, it just I don't know. I suppose I can't rule out. Maybe it's not 100% purposeful, intentional, I mean, but it does create this sense where you are simultaneously, and no, I mean, he has said it about at least other of his work, that he likes for the violence to, he wants us to get into a scene where we're like, this is cool, and then he shows some really strong violence, and it kind of, it doesn't pull us out of it, but it reminds us, hey, this is fucking violent. This is, because like sometimes action movies will just show violence and just like immediately move on. And this one, people get hurt. Pain does hurt here. And, people are wounded, and maybe, yeah, it's not really a spoiler to say there's at least one thing in the movie where someone actually has to recover, and or it is spoken about like, is this person going to be able to recover from this? Like maybe they'll live, but they won't be the same kind of thing. And yeah, I also really admire the level of variety here, because like there's a lot of action here, and somehow it never gets stale. And it feels like Tarantino, really bringing attention to the fact that, hey, action doesn't have to get generic and boring. And I mean, I don't know if the following is me reading too much into it, as I am wont to do, but it doesn't feel entirely not like a bit of a call out, because, and I've said this before, during this same time, Hollywood action movies were just not really fucking amazing. Like, I'm not saying that it was necessarily the longest amount of time that was the case. There were, relatively close to this, like off the top of my head, Starship Troopers, fantastic action, and personally, I think comic book movies started getting incredible at action. I think the first was probably either Iron Man 1 or The Dark Knight, one of those two, right around that time. And, but, I mean, the same year as this, we also had SWAT, which, I am a huge fan of David Ayer, but I personally, I think he did what he could, because if you look at like what must have been on the page, like the actual choreography of some of these So the setups and such, choreography might have been worked out by someone else, but he came up with cool concepts for, okay, this would be a really compelling thing to happen in this situation. But yeah, it is, and the PG-13 is part of it, and I don't know. Honestly, before, I guess, probably the Dark Knight trilogy, there was a while where I did feel like, especially around this time, in the early 2000s, where I thought maybe action movies should have to be PG-13 unless they are like, I mean, sometimes there's action scenes in like Pixar and Disney animated, that kind of thing, but like, I'm not saying SWAT would be amazing just from being R-rated, but it definitely does feel watered down in that regard as well as others. And this one, not even remotely, The I think that does pretty much right. And to be clear, I'm not saying everything from this time. Obviously, the first Matrix, really amazing action. I would make a case that even in that first one, at least some of the pacing, like there's chunks of that movie that are almost non-stop action, and it worked better in that than the 3 sequels. But even there, like, I think when they really nail tension and action, the Wachowskis, Bound, I think, gets it exactly right. It's been too long since I watched Assassins, which they wrote, but I think a case could be made that V for Vendetta perhaps has a tiny bit too little, but then I don't even know if I would say that that's really an action movie so much as a drama thriller with some action. But yeah, yeah, this is a movie where people will draw bladed weapons and spend several minutes fighting each other. And that just was not something we had seen from Tarantino. And, American movies around this time were not necessarily knee-deep in that sort of thing, And I guess that does bring us to the R rating. So the violence here is more like, yeah, in various ways, more than Tarantino's earlier work. And it's not like he's made a movie that didn't have, significant violence, really graphic, brutal stuff. But yeah, just how fucking much and how gnarly some of it is here, which I understand is at least in part in tribute to at least some of the martial arts films that, yeah, they, in the behind the scenes, they show a clip of, I'm afraid I would butcher the pronunciation, so I will just say there was a clip of a very specific movie that, I think it's Uma Thurman who notes that that was one they took inspiration from. A woman seeking revenge, and in that, clip, it's short, but there's a pretty significant amount of blood within mere seconds. And I will discuss some of the other R-rated elements, but I don't want to spoil. So I'll talk about them in the thoughts section. And yeah, so politically, this definitely has a mix, which I will discuss in the thoughts section. And I think that does, yeah. I rate this 8 amazing, references to culture and pop culture from Japan, China, and America. out of 10. And I just remembered okay, so before I start on the thoughts, because that's where this would usually be where I do that. I completely forgot to mention. So the action. In the DVD, Tarantino mentions that he thinks, action directors are the ones he admires the most. If you can direct action, you can direct anything. And I tend to agree. I think it is one of the most difficult things to get exactly right because of the kinetic energy. Action is one of those things, like you can do a horror movie where there is not that much fast movement. I need to watch the original because I hear it's a fucking classic, and it's obviously it's inspired a lot. The original Nosferatu. I've only seen clips, but one of the most famous clips in that does not show fast movement, but it implies something really disturbing without showing fast movement. And that can actually be even more effective. Some of the most scary horror movies I've ever watched don't have a huge amount of really, really fast movement, like The Babadook, for example. But action, by modern standards, by 2003 standards, you need movement in an American action movie, at least. You cannot simply imply. That is part of why I say, I appreciate some would argue with my definition of action, but that's why I say that I would not really consider, like I suppose an argument could be made for true romance, but I would not really call Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction action movies as much as crime thriller dramas with some action scenes. But it's about the way you film it, edit it, stage it, choreography. People have to rehearse. And, with all of that, you can still end up, like, there's a million little things that can go wrong. Seriously, I counted. And that's the thing. This is Tarantino's first real action movie, in my opinion. I don't think he completely nailed such things as the cinematography and editing. There are a couple of places where it is more frenetic than, as far as I can tell, is intended. Perhaps especially because the parts right around those are easy enough to follow. It seems like just, maybe he was learning as he went, and he shot the stuff that ended up frenetic before the other stuff, and going over the dailies, he was like, oh, okay, the camera has to be just a tiny bit further away, slightly less movement, that sort of thing. And especially because, like, this does really capture, when he does scenes of violence in his movies, he likes for there to be this brief reflection before and or after. I'm not sure I can think of an example in one of the ones I've watched, which is, again, almost all of them by now, where there isn't at all that, where it just has action with, yeah, I've made my point. I really admire how he manages to make this work here, because I can imagine a producer screaming at him like, no, you cannot, people will lose patience with this, but those are actually the parts that heighten the rest of it, and it never loses steam. It never stops being tense. It's a movie that, like, from the very, very start to the very end, yeah, unbelievably tense, and that is, like, outside of maybe, yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the only time where I felt that I was ever bored watching Tarantino, but this is one of the ones where there is something really, really tense from the very start. That is not always the case, and again, that's not a criticism of this or those. I'm glad he did both. It works so well here. Like, you immediately know. Like, I wonder how many people walked out of the theater within minutes of this, before the opening credits were over. And I suppose that does... But yeah, some of the editing is also, sometimes something will move just a tiny bit too fast, and you don't get a real sense of like what just happened. Which again, because other parts of the action so clearly have you, like, you can follow it. Like, you could, if you sat down right after watching this movie, if you had a good enough memory, you could write down every single move made, other than those few, And there are a lot of action movies where that's not the case. There are Tarantino movies where that's not the case. Like, I still can't 100% say, I guess that's a spoiler, so I won't give away exactly, but there's at least one Tarantino movie where after a scene of violence, even after watching it multiple times, I'm still like, did that person check out that person, or was it this other person? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because, like, yeah, sometimes, if you don't, until you do like forensics, like, even if you witness an act of violence, you might not be able to, I'm afraid I forget who it was, but a leftist YouTuber recently pointed out eyewitness testimony is actually some of the least trust. Oh, that might have been the anti-bot, actually. Now, I think that does cover the... But to be clear, it is not a huge problem for the movie. It is just something that, I try to be brutally honest in these videos. I want to focus on positives, because I want people to leave my videos, being positive about something. But I also want to make sure to acknowledge, But I think that, and that is also something I certainly have noticed. And I've seen others note this, acknowledge this as well. The first action movie done by incredibly talented directors, there will be at least a little bit of a learning curve. Big fan of Christopher Nolan. And to be clear, I'm not one of the... I don't even know how exactly to distinguish, but I've heard some really asshole men are big fans of his. I'm afraid I forget exactly what group specifically, but yeah, certainly the ones who are not far left. I am far left. I absolutely do not belong with the rest of those. I'm not making excuses for. He absolutely has made mistakes in his movies and some of the decisions he's made. I am not making excuses for him putting Tenet in theaters during COVID. But the let's see, it's one of those, so it's frustrating that the chuds have kind of tried to take over the whole, Hollywood, they're so out of touch kind of thing, because that is something we leftists have also been pointing out for a while now. But yeah, a lot of right-wingers, perhaps especially far right, they don't really have observations of their own that fit their ideology that actually are accurate about the real world, so they kind of have to hijack ours. That's not really anything new. Notice how in recent years they've started talking about how, affordability, and now Trump is saying that's a Democrat hoax. Democrat hoax that got you elected? Do you hear yourself? I guess not. Not at this point. Listen, their military actions or war crimes in Iran, I mean, Trump says it's over. Hegseth says it's only just begun. A journalist asked Trump, and he said, I don't know, maybe it's both. Maybe it's both. Who knows? How could you possibly tell if you're 100% on one end of the extreme or 100% on the other? Like, there's simply no way for someone who wants power and adulation without having to work for them to know which of those is the case. Now, but yes, Christopher Nolan, love pretty much everything that he's made. Perhaps not Dunkirk, but the rest of it. I'm willing to acknowledge, he made some mistakes when directing action in Batman Begins, and I've talked about that. I talked about that in my video on Batman Begins, so I'm not going to belabor. I'm not going to go into it here, but yeah. And I think that's enough of examples. So yeah, that brings us to the thoughts section. So from here on out, I am spoiling absolutely everything, and I guess I will just briefly talk about some of the so the thing, in case you stuck around just to find out a little bit. I'll start with. I don't think you should know this going into it, but if you just must know, yeah, the FX thing that you are not going to forget here. Sometimes when limbs are cut off, there will be a ridiculous, wonderfully so, fountain spray of blood, like to the point where it's like, that's not even remotely realistic. Like, it would not look like that, but it has an effect on you as a viewer. Some people find it revolting, and I'm not saying that they're wrong for that. Personally, I can't stand real life violence. I sometimes struggle to even watch, videos of police brutality, for example, or ICE, doing what they do. But when it is in fiction, at this point, there's not really anything that is too much for me. Like, sometimes afterwards, I will go to Reddit and look at puppies, or listen to some soothing music or something, but just seeing it when it's in fiction, when I'm confident that it is staged rather than them filming real violence and putting that in front of my eyeballs, I'm okay. But it definitely is, like, it's one of those things, if you think it might be too much, it probably is. In general, Tarantino's, yeah. So that was one thing, and I guess I guess it's also a decent place to put. So there is an anime sequence in this, and that was what I also did not want to give away in the spoiler-free review. And I want to acknowledge that I am not qualified to judge anime as such, to properly critique, review that. All I'll say is I thought it looked fucking amazing. Anime is one of those things I admire tremendously, but I simply do not have enough experience with the medium. I think I did I years ago do at least one review of something that was purely anime. I have reviewed Star Wars Visions, which has anime episodes. Not all of them are anime. And that's because I'm, I try to review nearly everything Star Wars, all the official stuff. There's a couple of things that I had to, but yeah. So I reviewed it through that lens, but yeah, it's like nothing looks quite like anime, and it's really effective, and I appreciate that it is, it doesn't feel westernized. It reminds me of the, yeah. How do you distinguish the anime not made in the West by Westerners? It feels like it belongs in, like, for example, there's some, yeah, I don't know that these references are the best, but I was a little bit reminded of Akira, for example, and certainly it felt closer to Studio Ghibli. I appreciate that that's obviously, yeah, in most ways not, but closer to something like that than, something that was made by and for Westerners, but in an anime style, because, that's, and I appreciate, there are a number of Japanese people who really resent when that is made, and there are also some who do appreciate it. And obviously there is also, and I'm not saying this excuses Americans doing anime, I am not qualified to speak on that, But, some anime took inspiration from American animation. That doesn't excuse Americans doing anime. I just think it's really cool that's, I love when different cultures can help inspire each other to make their own thing. I don't think it's great when, the whole culture vulture thing, Now, I think those are the things that I wanted to say right up front. So I'm going to try to keep the rest of this more or less chronological in the order that the scenes appear in the movie. I'm not going to reorder them in the, yeah. So, yeah, like, I mentioned, you might leave the theater. You might stop watching this before the opening credits, because that opening, fuck. Yeah, so there's several things going on there. You don't see Bill's face. You hear his voice, you see his feet as he walks over to her. And if I recall correctly, you don't even see at this point that she is pregnant. If I recall, you see that she has a big pregnant belly when we get the flashback to Vernita sucker punching her, the pregnant lady. She looks like she's about to pop. She looks like that thing is going to shoot out of there if you tap her on the shoulder. And the choice to do it in black and white, and I forget, I think I read once someone made it clear, but right now I forget if that was artistic or censor based, because the later scene in this, I understand in the whole bloody affair it is not in black and white, but for this they made some of it in black and white, and it is some of the most violent stuff that is in black and white there. But there's just something about seeing, her face is very white and the blood is starkly black, and then you have Bill going up and wiping some of it off. And it's this thing of like, Tarantino, for his faults, which I've talked about some of, and please also listen to Minority Voices talking about those, he really does get something like this right. Power dynamics. That is something that is consistent across the work of his I've seen by now, and once again, most of it, which is most of it, all but the one, all but Death Proof. And yeah, I appreciate that some might say, oh, well, he's being nice, wiping the blood off. You don't want to see someone you care about in that kind of situation. And he's talking about how his is not sadistic, he's being masochistic. And it's that thing that, so I'll talk more about Bill's character when I talk about, in my video on Volume 2, because we learned so much more about his character in that one. And that's not a spoiler for that movie. It's kind of just a given. It would be really silly if that movie ended and we're still like, well, who is this Bill guy, though? Like, it's in the title. Like, we have to know who Bill is. And I think it works that we don't really, by the end of this, we don't even see his face in this one at all. And it's not like, that, again, not a spoiler, we do in the second one. We only hear his voice, and I'm never going to turn down David Carradine. That's just, yeah. But there is an element of misogyny to his character. And one of the things that misogynists love to say, and please don't take my word for it, please listen to women who have themselves, who are survivors of domestic abuse or other forms of male on female violence, or, those who study it and such, to a greater extent than me, and I can relate to it better, because for me it's always going to be secondhand. Any abuse that I might face or have faced or will face, it's not going to be the same, whether, no matter the exact gender dynamic of it, because I am a cis man. But misogynists, they fucking love to say that they're not doing it to hurt her, and they they had no choice. Look what you made me do. Why did you make me do that to you? Did you expect me to be able to control myself and not attack someone who can't defend themselves? Do you not know me at all? And it's a cultural problem. It's not, we're not doing, this is not a channel where we tolerate any kind of biological essentialism, gender essentialism. We men are capable of overcoming that. Part of the problem is that young men are told that women are beneath us, and I'm not saying that's exclusive, that's universal. That's not all cultures. I can primarily speak to white Western cishet male culture because that's what I grew up in, you know. And here in Denmark, like in a lot of ways, we're nowhere near as extreme as America. Not at all, sadly. We definitely should have treated Greenland better, and there's still a way to go there. But within that culture, we men are taught that women are beneath us, and while we're not necessarily told that a woman, I don't remember ever being told directly by anyone, even the biggest misogynist that I remember, unfortunately having to spend time around until I turned 18 and could choose who I socialized with. I don't remember any of them directly saying that a man who lets a woman have any power over him is weak. But it logically follows from the idea that women are lesser than men. Like, it goes without saying. And that's something, that's a perception that is not rooted in reality, and we can work to change that. Like, I will admit, like, there was a time many, many, many years ago where I did, to some extent, believe at least some of these misogynistic ideas simply because I had not been properly presented with the alternative, the reality. I did not know enough, you know, women, you know, personally. And, you know, YouTube, leftist YouTube, feminist YouTube, especially women, have helped me tremendously through their videos. But that is what we're seeing here. You know, he is acting like, because like the thing is, well, if this is hurting you more than her, why are you doing it? And I appreciate, you know, I'm not going to give it away here, but I appreciate in Volume 2, something is said that is meant to explain it. I'll discuss that when I do a video on that movie. But for now, when I'm talking about this movie, this scene leaves, perhaps not everyone, but me, I find myself thinking that. And then, you know, but right, so yeah, the wiping of the blood. He doesn't have to do that. He is in part showing that he can. Because what he's saying doesn't really imply empathy or sympathy. Like, he's talking about, like, you know, you look like I could fry an egg on your face. Okay, that's not really an apology. Weird flex, but okay. But then she says, it's your baby, Bill. It's your baby. And then he shoots her in the fucking head. So to be clear, I'm not saying that we didn't know she was pregnant before. Did I misspeak before? Sorry. I'm not saying we didn't know she was pregnant or how pregnant she was. Wait, possibly how pregnant she was. Anyway, I'm not saying we didn't know that she was pregnant before seeing the flashback where Vanita, you know, hits her. I'm saying from what I recall, we don't see it visually. It is revealed when she says those words. And that's already, like, the fact that she's pregnant, you know, that's the thing. Within just mere minutes, there are so many extremes at play here. And I understand why some might say it's just too much. You know, it is exploitative to a degree that is wrong. You know, like, his movies are exploitative, and I'm not saying that as like an excuse, but I think a case could be made that there is such a thing as too exploitative. I'm not sure I'm gonna speak too much to that in this particular video. I mean, one of my rules of thumb about exploitation is I don't think that it should be irresponsible about a bad situation that it could make worse. Like it's one thing if it's like, okay, well that's never gonna happen, you know, but certain things like I mean, if you haven't already watched, Lindsay Ellis did a fantastic video on Nebula about, you know, South Park. I believe it's called something along the lines of, "Is there still a special place in hell for Matt Stone and Trey Parker?" Fantastic video. In it, she talks about some of the positives of the movie, bigger, longer, and uncut. And in that movie, there is, I guess I won't give too much away. I'll just say the idea is brought up of violent conflict between the nations of America and Canada. And while, I mean, today that is something some MAGA are actually talking about maybe happening, let's fucking hope not. But in 1999, that sounded like such a ridiculous thing. They were purposefully saying, you know, well, I guess America will attack fucking anyone, huh? What about, you know, so that's, you know, there is some exploitation there, but it is saying something that is like, you know, it's like, well, that's not actually going to fucking happen though, you know. But other than that, yeah, one of the specific things, I think it's incredibly important for exploitation to not, you know, have I made it clear? There are a number of exploitation, you know, pieces of media, not only movies, some shows, some games that I really fucking love, you know. I think for now I'll just leave it at, you know, Tarantino. But yeah, if you do exploitation media and you rely on negative stereotypes that might have some viewers thinking, oh, that's true of that group, to the degree where some percentage of them might actually become really threatening, perhaps even violent towards that group, that I think should be avoided as much as possible. I'm not saying you cannot bring up stereotypes. I'm saying you should do what you can to counter them. Now, that's some of what is going on in the scene. Yeah, so yeah. First thing, you know, we see immediately she's got a veil. This is her wedding day. She was attacked brutally on her wedding day, and, you know, that already is something that is incredibly fucked up. And then, you know, the way he talks to her, this kind of calm, like we'd almost, it's in some ways more off-putting than if he was like shouting verbal abuse at her. But he is kind of talking to her like, I mean, the tone of voice, it's almost like, you know, if you see a friend of yours like trip and fall and you're not, you know, you're not entirely sure, like, do they need help? Are they doing it because they're just like playing around and they're going to laugh at me if I say, oh, do you need a hand up or something? It's just, he doesn't sound like someone who has just engaged in brutal violence against a woman he purports to love, you know, which again, some misogynists, like the way they'll talk right after, you know, it does not sound as if they are actually, you know, they're because they're essentially not accepting that they just did something wrong. They're you know, I already described the fact that they are, you know, basically transplanting the blame. They're insisting that it must be the woman's fault because they're a good man and women are somehow, you know, anytime you listen to a bigot, be wary of, they will blame, in some cases literally, everything, sometimes just figuratively, on one or more individuals or groups that they are bigoted towards. I'm afraid I forget who coined it. Oh, was it Eric Reloaded maybe? But bigotry brain rot is a good way to put it, you know. Because like if you're not misogynistic, you can appreciate how ridiculous it is to say that someone who can't defend themselves could deserve or like sufficiently provoke, like those of us who are capable of, you know, harming others, we have to have self-control so that we do not do so. And I'm not saying that it comes easily to everyone, but that is the responsibility of when you know, and you know, one of the cases is women, but it's also other, you know, and this is the kind of thing that is really important to teach children, you know, so that they, because it's more difficult to change someone's perception of violence once they get older, but that's one of the ways in which, you know, some parents make sure their kid has a pet, for example, you know, because like that is something that hypothetically they could harm, and the parents can then, you know, make sure that they, you know, understand, you know, it would be really, you know, you love your little pet, you know, it would be really, really painful. They would be very upset with you if you hurt them. So you have to take care of them, you know, and that can then translate once they come of age to other, you know, not just the pet, but yeah. And other than that, the scene has the, you know, the fact that it is very clear that she is shot in the head, which I think that might be part of why, yeah, I can imagine it's like a censor thing to get it past censors. Shooting a pregnant woman in the head as she is saying it's your baby, that is yeah, I can appreciate why the MPAA balked and then hopefully cleaned up after themselves. But yeah, that is intensely misogynistic, you know, and immediately the stage is set, you know, and I do appreciate, you know, throughout the rest of the movie we are primarily seeing her go after women, and then the very ending says, you know, she will go after Bud and Bill as well. But it is in part a movie about misogyny. This first part is in part about misogyny. Not only that, and we do see, and I mean, I don't know if Tarantino is the best to explore that, but I have heard, I would not be saying if not, I have heard from female feminists, sometimes women will uphold the patriarchy even as it harms them. Sometimes it's in hopes that they will themselves gain some protection, you know, on account of that, you know. So yeah, internalized misogyny is also a part of it, but you do definitely see, you know, Vernita and Oren and Elle don't really seem upset about what they did. Like I noticed, and please, I hope the following is not just because of like translation thing, but when Oren apologizes to the bride near the very end, you know, she's not speaking English. I'm afraid I don't know quite enough to say for sure if it's Japanese or one of the Chinese, like maybe Chinese Mandarin, but she's not speaking English. It's subtitled into Danish as I apologize for mocking you before. Not attacking you, not leaving you for dead, not having you think, because by the end of the movie we do realize that's not the case, but having you think that you lost your baby, but mocking, you know. And I think that does cover the opening, and then we get, you know, I will never again be able to hear, so I think it is called Bang Bang he shot me down, or something like that, the same again. To be fair, I hadn't actually heard it before, but it is so perfect, you know, because there is this mournful vibe to the song, and the lyrics are great as well. You know, they don't all apply to the movie, but yeah, the more than you might think, you know, because there is the thing about, you know, wedding bells. It's just, you know, in the song, if I recall, it's been a little while since I did pay attention to the lyrics, but if I recall, it's that he gets married and she does not. So it's kind of the opposite there. But, you know, yeah, and it's this thing of like, there is a, so I mentioned, you know, Tarantino is very earnest. There is obviously some layer of irony to having this song, because like the song is not about physical violence. It's about, you know, as children they played, you know, they played pretend that they were shooting each other and he would shoot her, and then when they grew to adulthood, he got married and she felt like, you know, he shot me down, you know, is the, yeah. But it's a really yeah, because you could have, there could have been so many other pieces of music that would not have had the same effect. And the, I think the very next thing is indeed seeing the so yeah, she arrives. I appreciated that we did not realize, I don't think I want to name it exactly, but the wagon, the full name of the wagon, we do not get until after Vernita is dead, when she drives off, you know, and immediately we're like, there's a story there, and I'm looking forward to finding out. That's also something this movie does rather well. An observation I intended for the spoiler-free review. Oops. But yeah, and there's so much going on with Vernita. You know, Vivica A. Fox does not have a huge amount of screen time, but we get such a strong sense of her. And part of it is that she does get a pretty decent amount of dialogue for so little screen time. But yeah, the suburbs. The doorbell rings, and she just opens it and says, "You're early," because she was expecting someone else. She would never have guessed that the past caught up to her. She may be through with the past, but the past is not through with her. And that says so much, especially because it's immediately followed by her clearly not actually being out of practice. And I suppose this might be a heightened genre element, because I am aware that is a thing within, it's not necessarily exclusive to, you know, East Asian cinema, but there is a notion that, you know, oh, once you've learned, you never, you know, I've heard, it's not a spoiler, it's not a spoiler to say, I've heard there is something like that in at least one Fast and Furious movie. Now, the fight immediately sets the tone for the action scenes throughout the rest of the movie, with the, you know, a similar brutality to Tarantino's earlier work, but much more like, yeah, the choreography, you know, you have these things of like knives being stabbed and slashed. There is at least one that is thrown, and, you know, there's one that's like stabbed partially through a table, these sorts of things, you know. And yeah, the way they do get very sweaty and bloody, as you know, Vivica A. Fox noted in the behind the scenes. And the tension and contrast between the setting, because it looks like a nice place. You know, a lot of people would want to live there. The suburbs are not really my kind of thing, maybe because I've watched enough Todd Solondz movies, but a lot of people would want to live there. And it is the kind of, you know, in America, the suburbs are the symbol of settling down. Not settling for less, but settling down. You know, you may have had, you know, maybe your youth had some chaos and insecurity. Maybe you even, you know, indulged in something that maybe you shouldn't have. But now your life is set. And in this scene, that is, you know, that is the setting, but the physical action is harsh and brutal. You know, it looks like the kind of thing that you would expect to see in a dark alley or like maybe a dojo, you know, but certainly not this kind of, yeah. And that is then taken to a new level when Nikki comes home. And the way that we see, you know, so they're standing there staring at each other as the school bus pulls up and the door opens and someone walks out. And, you know, like yeah, it's abundantly clear. Yes, this is indeed her daughter returning, you know. And the eyes, you know, the pleading eyes of, I think I will continue calling her Vernita, because certainly that is still who she is to the bride. And bride is the protagonist. And no, I'm not going to give away the name. I remember the bride's real name. It is revealed in the second movie. That's not a spoiler. That's just a thing that happens. But the yeah, the pleading in her eyes. You know, there is no like I will kill you. There's just this is my daughter. And we don't know exactly what the bride is going to say or do. So when the door opens and she, you know, hides the knife behind her, there is a sense of relief. And, you know, yeah, things have changed. This is not what it was just seconds before the bus pulling up, when they were hitting each other with fire pokers, slashing with knives, knocking over shelves and tables onto each other, that sort of thing. I guess the table is knocked over onto someone, but you know. Anyway, and I love the little parenting thing. You know, Nikki comes home and is like, you know, what happened to the living room? And Vernita does that thing sometimes parents do to small children, where it's like, because like, you know, what is she gonna say? This is mommy's old, you know, colleague. She's here to kill me. That's not going to work, obviously. So she lies, and, you know, the kid, and I appreciate this because that is like a lot of people don't respect children's intelligence. Yeah, I think a 4-year-old would be like, my dog did this? You know, like, it does seem very unlikely. And it's also, you know, Vernita, she's thinking on her feet. She's not, it's, yeah. And I appreciate the fact that, you know, to the bride, she says her name is Nikki. But when she has to do a parenting thing, she says, Nikia, you know, Nikia, go to your room now. And also the thing about like, you know, please be careful. There's broken glass on the floor. You could cut yourself. And just that line, because like just 30 seconds earlier, we were watching them sometimes succeeding, sometimes just attempting to cut each other. And like we see the flashback, so we are like, I mean, I don't approve, but you know, we don't necessarily approve, but we understand why the bride wants revenge on her, the knife expert of Fox Force 5 and the divas. I read that somewhere, that it's supposed to be like, you know, because yeah, Deadly Viper Assassination Squad, technically sort of divas, yeah. Which is also interesting because at least one of them is a man. Is Bill one of the divas, or is he the leader of the divas? I'm not entirely sure, but you know, traditionally diva is referring to women. But the yeah, to have this 4-year-old there, and yeah, you know, also the little parenting thing of, you know, yeah, the bride is like, oh, you know, my name is, you know, well, let's see, I think it's how old are you? Nikki? Well, asked you a question. You know, that's again, like, because at this point, like, she thinks there is a chance she's going to survive this, and she wants to make sure her daughter answers, you know, questions when she's asked. And then, well, 4 years old. I had a daughter. She would be about 4 now. And that sentence, those few words, there's so much there. Because like to a 4-year-old meeting a new person and them saying, yeah, me too, I too have or had a daughter. She would be about 4. I mean, it essentially sounds like, oh, you want to set up a play date. I guess it's up to my mom, But to the audience and to Vernita, because she could have said anything. She could have said, oh, 4, that's such a great age to be, or, what's your favorite toy? But she specifically refers to her daughter that's at this point in the movie, we and her are confident is dead. And that's also just the flashback. I love the editing of it. The kind of siren-y music and the close-up and her face as she's standing there, triumphantly over the bride, and her, punching, and we see the big pregnant belly, and it's just, yeah. But yeah, ultimately, Nikki leaves, and but yeah, so yeah, to Vernita and the audience, to Vernita, what the bride is saying is, Vernita is the reason why I no longer have a daughter who would have been 4 years old by now. That is what she took from me. And she's not expressing that in a way that Nikki at that point understands, but it's not really for her. It's for Vernita. It's to say, I am willing to not kill you in front of your 4-year-old, but you are not off the hook. And she reiterates that very shortly after, And yeah, it works so well, this thing of, it does sound like, I fully bought it that first time, I was thinking, oh, that's going to be a cool scene, because they're like, okay, what was it like, 4 a.m., baseball, little league, practice field. Was it knives and like wear black, wear a sock over your head, this is black stocking over your head, that whole thing. Like, I fully believed it, and it of course is meant to get the bride to lower her guard. And I personally do believe that the bride was ready for that she was okay with, because she did not want, I definitely get the sense she did not want to, for Nikki to see the death of, because like hypothetically, let's say, okay, so it's 4 a.m. and they're fighting out in this place. I mean, she could probably dispose of the body and Vernita would be a missing person, but yeah, Vernita, of course, does not intend for that. And for as much as she's done to put that life behind her, 4 years, that's, 4 years and 6 months, which I guess doesn't mean that she was 2 months pregnant when she attacked the bride, which just makes it even more fucked up. She herself was pregnant, and I'm not an expert, but I feel like after 2 months, you probably know, because that is like 2 missed periods. I understand that some women don't realize. Oh wait, shit. Fuck. Is that the cutoff? Actually, come to think of it, because that's where there's been discussion about if 8 months is too late for an abortion, and I lean on what, let's see. Ideally, 3rd trimester abortions should be the absolute last resort, essentially life of the mother. And okay. It is very important that I underline, I am not telling women to do what with their bodies. That is none of my fucking business whatsoever. What I'm saying is, as far as legislation, I think, really, ultimately, if new scientific evidence comes out, or if a strong enough ethical case is made, then I am 100% willing to change my stance on this. But currently, what I have seen, I've looked at a lot of evidence and arguments for it, and currently my stance is, yeah, third trimester abortions should be kept to a minimum. It's that thing of, once the baby is viable outside of the womb. This does not mean that I'm saying that that woman has to raise that baby. If I'm saying it should be the absolute last resort. And, it is, yeah, like if the, let's see, if maybe a C-section and then giving the baby up for adoption, that will, for a number of people, be the solution. But I would never, ever judge a woman who had an abortion, pretty much no matter the, no matter the circumstances, because it's not my business. And I honestly, I remember years ago hearing, female feminists point out, if a woman has, should be punished for having an abortion or using birth control, as some Republicans say she should, then so should men. I agree. Now, I think that does bring us, let's see. Yeah, and I also really appreciate, like, yeah, Vernita, she's like, well, I gotta make cereal for Nikki. Which, like, yeah, if, Nikki's 4 years old, she can't handle all of the elements of cereal. I can imagine, for example, lifting the milk is going to be an issue. But inside the cereal box, Vernita did hide a gun for this kind of circumstance, which I guess means that she's always the one fixing the cereal, or maybe Dr. I don't remember the last name, but the doctor, perhaps he is just that comfortable with guns. And I do appreciate, like, I mean, short of, like, I don't know if step stool, like, when it comes to gun control, I think, I understand why members of minority groups that are targeted for violence, why they want guns. I would like a world where no one feels like they need a gun, much less does need one. But I don't blame members of minority groups, and, Vernita is a black woman and a former assassin. But yeah, obviously, if you are going to have a gun in your home, you have to be very careful about having it in a place that cannot be reached. And honestly, I think they are doing an interesting kind of balance here, because, like, the cereal, if she was going to go, not looking for a gun, but if she was going to dig through something, if Nikki was going to dig through something that she, maybe shouldn't without parental supervision, it would probably be, like, cereal is, the top of that list, but it is also, like, up on a shelf, so maybe she can't quite reach it. Yeah, it's I don't know. I just couldn't help but think about these things in relation to that. Anyway, I think I should probably, I have spent a lot of time on this video already. We're all over 2 hours, and I'm only on one of the first scenes. So, but yeah, she does and I also like the detail that she shoots and she doesn't hit immediately, because that is something that I did not realize for a while, and then I heard from people who've actually been in the situation. It is more difficult to shoot another person, especially if you only get the one shot, than a lot of movies make it seem. And she was also, she had to rush to do it, because if she did take her time to aim, then the bride would, duck or throw her knife or something. And also, like, the sort of poetic irony that the knife expert is taken out by a knife. And I love the way it's framed. Yeah, also the shot from above, like, sort of bird's eye view, where you see all the cereal on the floor. It kind of reminds me of that Hitchcock movie that also has someone dead, and we see it from slightly above, and there's something, I don't know if that's a spoiler. I wouldn't, I'm glad that I didn't know it going into that movie, so I won't say it exactly. Maybe you can deduce, because there is at least one very famous of those. And I'm obviously not making excuses for Hitchcock's behavior towards some of his actresses and such. Now but yeah, and then we see the bride kneel down, pick the knife up, and as she stands, or as she kneels, one of those, we see Nikki standing there behind, and of course she was. She heard a gunshot. Like, it'd be pretty ridiculous if she just, like, I guess maybe she could be frozen in panic up there or something. But yeah, and the bride, true to her sense of honor, she doesn't say, yeah, she doesn't apologize. Let's see. I think she apologizes that Nikki saw it. That was not supposed to happen. But she does not say that she regrets killing her mother. And she says, if one day you find that you want revenge on me, I'll be ready for you, kind of thing, which is also a cool reference to a movie that, is in the IMDb trivia. You can find that there. Not the best movie in the world, but it's neat that there's a reference there. And yeah, she doesn't say, stay the fuck away from me. She says, fair's fair. I am getting revenge if you think you should too. It underlines the cyclical nature of violence. Violence begets more violence. And she knows that, and yet she is still engaging in it. Because at the end of the day, she could hypothetically choose not to. She could go hide somewhere. I mean, I'm not saying it would necessarily be easy, but yeah, it is. And I do also appreciate the bride does not kill this child, who, she acknowledges might someday try to kill her. And I think that does bring us to the so yeah, we have the flashback to the church, and Michael Parks. God damn, he's just so fucking good. And yeah, so I have to admit, I didn't quite catch the wording in English, but according to the subtitles, apparently he did swear as he was telling the son one not to swear in a church. And yeah, we see a little bit more of what it looked like after the massacre, and then she spits, and we're later told that's an unconscious reflex. That is how defiant she is. She survived being shot in the head, and if someone gets too close to her or bothers her in some way, she will spit in their fucking face. And I also noticed, I don't really want to repeat the exact word, but the language he used when he said she's still alive, there was some misogyny there as well, which is also like, the fuck did she do to you? You're a cop. You found someone you thought was dead. They're alive. Why are you upset? Like, isn't this like a good day at the office? This seems like it should be a relief, especially as they're talking about like how all this was done by professionals and this whole thing, And I think, and we also have the way he refers to the organ player is I forget if that is that racist or racial. I'm not 100% sure, but that does go with, Southern sheriff. Yeah. And I think that does bring us to the... So yeah, then we have L. Wonderful Brian De Palma. And, well, let's see. So if I recall, this part, Tarantino both said, he talked about like Brian De Palma, and I mean that, I already mentioned. No, I didn't. The thing is, there's two things that reminded me of De Palma. This part, and also the long tracking shot inside the. Yeah, I mentioned. I didn't say exactly which one, but that was the the part where I really thought of De Palma more than Tarantino, even though Tarantino has also done, and they're not the only ones, you know, Scorsese likes tracking shots and such. But yeah, we have, in addition to that, Tarantino said that the hospital scene was his Giallo reference. I am not very familiar with Giallo. I might watch more. I'm not promising doing... I mean, I guess, yeah, I did do that one video because, what's it called? I can see it from here. The Wax Mask is technically Giallo. It's what, you know, I've watched that and some of the stuff that was, well, let's see. I think if I recall correctly, Dario Argento did have something to do with that one. I've watched some of what he's written and or directed. Yeah, I definitely don't. I'm no expert on it, but I can imagine that it is. Tarantino himself said the hospital is Giallo. I don't know if it's both Giallo and Brian De Palma, or if the editor just cut to that right after he said De Palma, before he said Giallo, and that. But it, you know, there are times where De Palma has done something somewhat similar to that. I could imagine there's elements of both, but yeah, and she goes in there and disguises herself, and we have a little thing about the red cross on the eye patch, as if is, you know, part of her disguise, because obviously, you know, someone like it's like a nurse's uniform, I think it is, you know, and normally the red cross would be on the hat, but I am not the right person to discuss, so I will merely note some things that I have heard. I'm aware that some disability advocates feel that you should not... If, let's see. I need to be very careful in how I express this. I think it is the fact that Tarantino himself does not have the physical disability that is being depicted. I mean, yeah, really, I don't know that he has any physical... It's certainly not something as immediately visible as that. You know, I mean, there are people in the real world who, you know, they don't necessarily wear an eye patch, but they might have something wrong with one of their eyes and might have something to, you know, that is visible for other people. And yeah, there is a school of thought among disability advocates that say that if you are not part of that community, you should not be, you know, depicting characters who do. And also note, I mean, at the end of the day, Elle does not need to be. It's just, it's a bit of, it makes her visually distinct, but that is, and I acknowledge that there's details about it in Volume 2. I will talk about those when I do that video. But there is also a school of thought that says if you are going to feature disabled, visually evident disabled people in your piece of media, which, to be clear, disability advocacy is not saying that that should never ever happen. It's just about who is doing it and how it is being framed. And I mean, Elle is a badass, and she's not like a worse person than other... I mean, they all want to kill the bride, you know, none of them are. It's just she's the one who goes to poison her. And from what I understand from dialogue, it seems like it was Bill's idea. You know, he sent her on, because he says mission has been canceled. He does not say, how could you go there without talking to me first? He changes his mind part way through. So he's the one who thought that this would be okay, you know. Or I suppose it's possible that he sent her to check, and if she had been awake, they should have fought, and he's upset about... But he also somehow knows that she's going to kill the bride without... He doesn't even ask, you know, if she's in a coma, are you about to kill her? Anyway, yes. A number of disability advocates would say that if you are going to depict disability in this very, you know, clearly visual way, it is okay, perhaps even good, to depict it in a very visually striking way. And that is something I have to admit I did not realize about the Book of Boba Fett, but I watched a video by someone who is themselves disabled and leftist, and they discussed how, there was, some of the representation there, at least, was at the very least leaning in the right direction. And they pointed out, that the YouTuber did, that there was actually ableism in the response to it. Among other things, at least, there was a non-zero number of posts online that accused the visually disabled people of basically attention seeking. Like, why are they like showing that? Why do they have this very distinct thing? And called into question whether or not the disabled individual or group of people were even disabled. And part of that is, of course, that for so long we've been told that disabled people should essentially disappear into the background. We shouldn't really be able to tell, there are certain things that obviously you can immediately tell. But hypothetically, if one is talking about a prosthetic limb, then a lot of ableists would say, no, it has to look convincing. I should be able to not even realize that there's a disabled person near me. And I appreciate that some people would say, is that really ableism? I would not be saying that. I didn't even realize it before I heard it from disability advocates, but we should not want them to be invisible. We should just accept them as they are. And a number of disabled people do very specifically, they have, for example, prosthetic limbs that are very eye-catching, where you essentially can't really help but notice. Like, it might be a very distinct color. It might be a shape that makes it evident that, it might be both. Like, it doesn't necessarily look like a hand or a regular leg and foot, that sort of thing, So those are the different arguments I've heard. I don't know if this is good or bad or neutral representation. Now, and Daryl Hannah, just her face and the whistling and the split screen and the way that, like, the camera goes to the bride and then it goes like off to the side and then the screen splits down and then it goes on for like maybe 2 minutes or something before we're back to out of split screen. And that, again, like, not a lot of directors would do that today, but it's so effective. Like, everyone was talking about it right after the movie came out, in a movie that has a lot of violence. Yeah, that was something that we all remembered still. Like, for all the gushing blood, we still remember the scene that's so much earlier in the film and how fucking cool that was, And I love the way that at first she is like whistling it. It's diegetic, but then it becomes non-diegetic and like other instruments are added and this whole thing is just, fucking amazing. And I also really appreciate that we hear her shout from Bill's phone. That's how loud she is. And also just the thing about, keep your voice down. It's a hospital. You could bother patients. But yeah, also, it wouldn't exactly be good for her to be spotted in there with a fucking syringe of poison on her, And the way that he, like, we don't see his face, but he's got the sword and it's mostly sheathed. He takes it a little bit out and then puts it back in, So immediately we understand he knows how to use this thing. Like, that's not just like, someone borrowed it to him or something. And even when he is specifically talking about, we are not going to do this act of violence, his mind is still kind of on violence. Like, they could have had him, even if you want to say, they need him to do something with his hands. I don't know. You could have him solving a crossword puzzle to show that he can focus on two things at once. You could have, like, what are those called? Stress balls. He could be, I don't know, playing with a baseball, something. There's so many different options. It's very deliberate choice, in my opinion. And then we have, never wake up. And then she wakes up, the 4 years, 6 months later. whatever, later. And yeah, she is not awake for terribly long before she hears commotion, and she realizes, it's probably best to pretend. And also, oh my god, when she holds her belly and cries, I guess this is a good time to briefly talk about. So, within feminism, it is important to distinguish between, there are schools of thought that say that feminist media should not focus too much on such things as pregnancy, because some people will take that piece of media in and get this kind of gender essentialist thing from it, of like, oh, if a woman, for a woman to care deeply about something, it has to be related to pregnancy. It has to be related to the uterus in some way. And obviously that is, when, like, not all women do have, babies. Not all women have a uterus. You are not less of a woman for not having a uterus. And that's something that it's really, really crucial to note. Some women do not have uteruses because they are trans, some because they've had a hysterectomy. And it is really, really awful when a woman has one of those two, and there might be others, but those are, off the top of my head. If a woman does not have a uterus and she's made to feel like less of a woman, that is awful. And this is a good time to briefly note, every so often you will have transphobes saying that trans women are not women because this, that, and the other thing. If you are capable of constructing a definition of women that includes all cis women and excludes all trans women, you will be a fucking hero to the rest of the transphobes. So far, no one has been able to do it. And yeah, like, hop to it. It would be, we would no longer be able to point that out. And instead of me butchering, because I don't quite remember it, you can do a search. Others I've seen a bunch of different YouTube videos where they note, where they list the different things that are sometimes thought of as, okay, that is important for a woman to be a woman. But yeah, one of them is, not all women have uteruses, for the reasons I have just explained. So that is one thing. And this movie is in part about how they took her baby on her wedding day. That is, those are two of the major things of traditional femininity. Her wedding day is supposed to be the best day ever, and her having a child. And for a number of people, they would say that it has to be biological, and that's, again, kind of silly. Like, you can be a parent without it being, without the kid being biologically related to you. We really have to get to a place where, like, adoption is not seen as, like, lesser. Like, think about how wonderful it is that this kid, who would have grown up in the system otherwise, gets to have parents. Think about how much love that takes. And, a number of the parents, statistically speaking, some of the best parents are LGBT plus couples who perhaps do not want to reproduce. For example, if it is a couple of two men or two women, then, obviously one of the two parents, biologically speaking, is not going to be part of, and I guess, obviously, I'm not saying that it's impossible for, I know some people, I'm not saying monogamy is the only way to live. Polyamory, I've heard great things. It wouldn't really be for me, but I don't want anyone to feel like, that there's something wrong with it. It is, others can explain it better. Let's see. Ooh, I want to say the leftist cooks, or as they pronounce it, the leftist cooks, which is a wonderful, I am envious of such a pitch perfect YouTuber name, because, like, you literally, how do How do you as a right-winger insult them? They're referring to themselves as leftist cucks. Just, yeah, pouring a big old bucket of water right over one of the pieces of ammo that conservatives, for some reason conservatives love this idea that we hate. I'm sorry, listen, please call me a cook. I need a good laugh. Oh my God. Just like have something to do for a couple of minutes while I finish laughing, because it would crack me the fuck up. I don't recall ever having anyone call me that directly, but it is just, my God, imagine thinking that's the worst insult. Fuck me. I'm sorry, I happen to think we leftists are substantially better at insulting conservatives in ways that really cut deep. And instead of me trying to, I'm not going to mention one of mine because they pale in comparison to those of Kalen Conrad and Dead Domain. Those YouTubers are phenomenal at, honestly, I don't even know if I want to narrow down, like, genuinely every time that they, like, insult someone, it is like, fuck me. Should I call 911 and report a murder using words as the weapon? Anyway, leftist cucks can do a really great job explaining, explaining what the monogamy and polyamory, and obviously I'm also not saying that monogamy, the polyamory is for everyone. As mentioned, I mean, at this point, I don't think I'll ever be in a romantic relationship again, but if I were, it would still be monogamous. Honestly, part of the reason I even say it is I wouldn't rule out, I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't rule out that someone watching my videos knows one of my exes, and I know both of my exes well enough to know they would not want someone thinking that they would be okay with polyamory. If I was polyamorous, I wouldn't be ashamed of it. Anyway, yeah, monogamy for those who want it, polyamory for those who want it. There is nothing, neither is inherently destructive. The problem is if you're being forced into one of them. From what I have heard, people who are genuinely unhappy about being in a polyamorous relationship are the ones who felt pressured or outright forced into it. I'm not saying that it's impossible for there to be another circumstance, but every single YouTuber that I have come across that hated polyamory, either from, some from attempting it, some from being asked to join, each of them have said that it's something they don't want for themselves. And several of them even came out and said, and that doesn't mean that they think there's something inherently wrong with it, it's just not for them. I think I have said as much as the other school of thought on, and as far as feminist thinking that I have heard, there might be even more, but the two that I know well enough that I feel I can somewhat at least describe, perhaps apply, other than this thing of, well, feminist media should not focus too heavily on these traditionally hyperfeminine things. The other school of thought says that when it is examining misogyny, patriarchy, the pains unique to the women who have, biologically reproduce, those who get married and for whom the marriage is important. For some it is a contract, which is like technically, legally speaking, that is what it is. I'm not saying that means that it can't mean more than that to you, but one common criticism I've heard from the left of marriage is, hey, it's kind of just a contract. Let's not make it more than it is. If you're happy in your marriage, then I am really, really happy for you. Anyway, then we have the, let's see, there's definitely at least one more thing. Yes, and this movie is in part exploring patriarchy and misogyny, because the first person we become aware of as harming the bride is Bill, whose baby it is, and he shoots her in the head as she is saying that on her wedding day. So immediately, that paints how we view the rest of the film, even as most of it is her going after the women who participated when Bill, he gave the order. And, the fact that one of them actually has a baby of her own really underlines, she participated in the patriarchy. She harmed women, including pregnant ones. She attempted to murder one that she used to work with. And now she thinks she can just retire and let bygones be bygones and it's going to be okay. And she gets to be a mother when she took that away from the bride. That is, there's a school of thought that says that the movie should have been written and or directed by women. But it is a potent criticism of patriarchy and misogyny, including internalized misogyny. And I think that might be what I'm going to say about it for now. But yeah, so in the scene, she wakes up, she realizes, oh, there's, they're about to come in here, so she pretends to be asleep. And I love that they cut to her face and we see her, she has to be subtle about it because they can't know, but she fucking hates these two. I hesitate to call them men. I don't know. Do you qualify as that if you're willing to treat women like that? I'm not sure. So to be clear, obviously I'm not saying that, oh, they're like women. That doesn't really make sense. But yeah, I feel like the word man implies adulthood, and they are not emotionally mature. That's, yeah. And they are some of the most disgusting, like they don't even have that much screen time, but again, everybody remembers. I don't know anyone in person that forgets either of these two, and the fact that this guy, so there's, yeah, shit, all of the dialogue in that scene. I don't want to spend too much longer because this video is already getting so long. Anyway, yeah, yeah, you have the thing about, like, the rules are that he can't leave marks on her. He can't attract attention. Other than that, he can do what he wants to. And he even yeah, I'm not going to say it, but he specifies, you cannot impregnate her. So, and then the guy, this motherfucker says, you're the best one I'm having today. And I appreciate that it's not impossible, that the other ones were consensual, but I feel like someone who's paying $75 to rape a woman who's in a coma probably prefers that sort of thing. So yeah, this is a serial fucking rapist. And seeing her attack him, hearing his agony, I'd be lying if I pretended like there wasn't some catharsis there, And I really appreciate the detail. I love the way that the Tarantino works in little weaknesses and shortcomings in, like, characters and circumstance and such. Because, like, yeah, 4 years in a coma, yeah, her legs, she would not be able to stand on them right now. Plain and simple. That is just, and there's so much American media where they would act like, because she's so tough, And it is, of course, there are other elements, like the fact that she was shot in the head and survived. Like, that is, like, it's, I don't know. I appreciate that there are parts of the head where you could technically be shot, but still, that does feel like, especially considering, I mean, it's Bill. He's a killer. He knows how to do this. I guess it's not impossible that he on some level was like, oh, I can't quite do it, so he aimed in a place that wouldn't quite, I don't know. But yeah, and then the other guy comes back, sees the body of the other guy, sees the empty bed, and then she, with the knife, I felt that. Like, I think all of us at some point in our lives have had some, just a little bit of pain in the, shit, I forget what that's, I don't, it's been so long since I talked about this in English. I know what it's called in Danish, but yeah, that part of the foot, you know, we know how fucking sensitive it is. And yeah, he would not be able to stand back up immediately after that. You know, she I think she severed some of the, there's some very specific stuff there, you know, and she as a killer would know that's a really great place. From her position, that is a really great place to attack, you know, to target. And she doesn't know right away that this guy has no connection to Bill, you know, yeah, which he then has the flashback and realizes he is a misogynist, but he has no idea about this other misogynist. And yeah, you know, the look on his face as she repeats his words back to him. Once again, Tarantino doing great with having dialogue where a character restates something someone else has said in some way, you know, and yeah, his eyes as he's like, she remembers, you know, and I'm sorry. I know some people would say that that's wrong, and I don't in real life, but him being confronted like this, I mean, okay, the confrontation itself, the fact that she is telling him, "I know what you did to me," you know, that I think, you know, in real life, any survivor who wants to do that, I think a case could be made that you know, in many circumstances, that is, if it is deemed that it really will be cathartic, that it won't be, you know, more pain than it's worth, because there might well be at least some pain. I'm not sure that's entirely avoidable, but you know, her killing him, that I don't think should be done in real life, but in a piece of media and fiction, it's hard to deny that it, yeah, because men like this exist. That's horrifying, and that's something we have to do something about. We have to fix the culture. We have to improve the culture. We have to make sure that no one feels comfortable behaving in this way. It is evident from the way he's talking in that flashback. He raped her too. And then he started accepting money so that other men could rape her. He is a serial rapist who enables other serial rapists so that he can make money. He is the lowest of the low. If this movie had been made today, and if he was more rich and powerful, he would be in the Epstein files, you know, just the absolute, yeah. And seeing his face as he realizes she knows, and he knows that that means that she's got at least one more door slam of his head in her. Yeah, that's, I felt that. I appreciate that it cuts to her already being in the wheelchair, because that is one thing I have heard it described as difficult to film a person getting into a wheelchair in a way that is not going to at least be perceived, even if not intended so, by many audiences as the person needing the wheelchair looking, I don't feel comfortable using the language. I mean, yeah, it making them look, let's go with the word weak. And yeah, the, you know, and also, like, once she is in that wheelchair, like, again, I don't know even one person who watched that scene and thought it made her look weak. It's evidence of how determined she is, because like right now she needs it. And that's another thing we don't see enough. Sometimes someone needs a wheelchair temporarily. Doesn't mean that they're never going to be able to walk on their own. And that was actually, there was a controversy. I don't think I want to mention exactly because from what I understand, like I've heard from some of the people involved in that controversy saying they really don't want more attention about this. But years ago, there was a thing where someone made fun of someone else and claimed this person is not really disabled because they didn't always need a wheelchair. Like sometimes they needed a wheelchair and other times they were able to stand and walk without it. And it's just like, how little do you know about how that works that you don't understand that sometimes it is temporary, like, and I don't know, hopefully scenes like this can help, because like, we by this point in the movie we have already seen she ends up being able to walk and run and jump and all this stuff, and yeah, I think that does bring, okay, I would be remiss if I did not briefly mention it was really cool when Vernita and the bride were fighting, and it's like a frying pan and a knife against each other, because like, yeah, you really just need something to block with, and then it's settled by the the knife slicing, I think it's the arm that's holding the frying pan, very, very clever. That's also, I love how in the fighting in this, they are clearly trying to win. They're not trying to look cool. They go for blows that would kill. And this is something that I appreciate, not all forms of martial arts, but I have heard, so, one of the things going on here is like samurai kind of thing. And I have heard that samurai fighting, some movies will try to make it look cool, but I've heard from people who've studied it, samurais fought to win. A samurai fight might not last very many seconds, depending on how evenly matched the two were, but you would try to finish it as soon as at all possible. And that is, of course, also just like, as soon as you hear that, it's like, oh yeah, of course, like, because the other person has a sharp object that could kill in a fraction of a second. Of course you want them to stop attacking you with it as quickly as possible, but we've had so many movies that just make it look cool. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I appreciate whenever so often we get something like this, where it's like, no, like, this is how you would actually try to win in this circumstance. Anyway, that brings us to the, let's see, there's at least one more thing that I really wanted to say about and also the detail that she has to retrain about the toe, although of course part of what's going on is Quentin's foot fetish. And to be clear, progressive channel, we don't kink shame here. I only say it like that because I have heard women who have worked with him express that they were uncomfortable around him when they were barefoot. Now, the, like 100%, to be clear, if you have a foot fetish and you are with one or more partners and they are comfortable with the foot fetish and you are engaging in it in a way that doesn't make them feel bad about it, there's no problem there. I'm a big believer in, when it comes to sex, it is about consent, protection if applicable, and safety. That is it, and yes, so the let's see, yeah, I think that is when she goes to Okinawa. And yeah, the entire scene is just awesome. So many great little details, and it is really cool seeing Sonny Chiba. I get wanting to watch this guy in a lot of stuff, and he doesn't do like martial arts or something. The closest, I guess, is when he throws the baseball, but I totally get, like, dude's got so much charisma. And the little details about, he yells at the guy to bring in the tea. And I don't know enough about their culture to say if this is insensitive or not. But the I did notice that there was a discussion of a power hierarchy there, which, as a far leftist, ears perked up. And they talked about how even if they were in the military, Hattori Hanzo would still be in charge. And I do, again, think that is noteworthy. Like, the movie doesn't spend that much time delving into that aspect of power dynamics, but certainly, as much as they sometimes argue, the various killers in the movie tend to end up following the orders. Elle is very upset at being called off from killing the bride, but she accepts it. And yeah, like none of the yeah. So I think that is. And also, I do think it is interesting that Bill, the way he talks to the people who work for him, there is this sort of fatherly quality, like a patient parent, just being like, now listen, I'm sorry, can I just make my point here? This is why I don't think we should be doing this. Do you understand? He's not like, because he could literally just say, you work for me. We are both people who kill others. Like, listen, if you have a problem, how about pistols at dawn, motherfucker? Like, there's no, you're going to do what I say, and you're going to do it now. Other Tarantino characters would. But, yeah, once again, most of what I have to say about Bill's character will be in my video on Volume 2. But I do think there is some... We learn enough about him here that he is interesting. There is more going on with him than we immediately, because like on paper, he tried to kill the bride, even though she's pregnant with his baby. That is genuinely something that I guess this is a decent enough time to, so yeah, paints him as misogynistic. This is a decent enough time to just briefly acknowledge, yeah, she's like 8 months pregnant. I mean, I want to say, is it called a C-section when it's... I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, hypothetically, you could, remove the baby and the baby survive that. If it was much earlier in the yeah, then that would be very unlikely, And so this is another aspect of the traditional femininity. So when she enters, she starts out being polite and essentially like she has him thinking that the circumstance is very different from what it actually is, and thus that is part of how she gets him to to help. Because hypothetically, let's say that she just walked in and said, "You're Hattori Hanzo, you're going to give me a sword." I think she would have been told to get out, and there would not have been any way for her to get to convince him again. And I also think it's noteworthy, she does not steal a sword. Like, she's not above stealing. She stole the wagon, which, I don't know. Is it stealing if they're dead? I guess it might go to... God, I hope he's not a father. Anyway, she is willing to take something that does not technically belong to her. But that is not the case with... And she also does not... she starts by saying, "You're going to make me a sword." And then he says he doesn't do that anymore. And then she says, "Okay, give me one. I'm not buying it. You can give me one." And then he says, "Okay, I will make you one." Her preference is for him to make her one that is for her. She will accept him giving her one. She's not going to buy one, but she's not going to steal one either. And yeah, the fact that, they have some rapport, and yeah, I mean, she is very much putting on an act. This is not the bride. And though he does not know that until, later in that scene, we do. We can immediately tell this is not at all how she has talked to anybody else in the movie so far. And like, even if we don't immediately realize it's about a sword, like, we know she's not there to chit chat. That's not, like, by this point we've seen her kill Vernita Green and then tell her daughter, come at me, if you need revenge on me, I'll be waiting. There is no way that this is just like small talk. Oh, she's just there for a hot drink or something. Like, no fucking way, And yeah, the guy who usually gets the tea, who always for 30 years gets the tea, he goes out to get the sake reluctantly because he thinks it's too early. And as soon as the name Hattori Hanzo is mentioned, we don't even see him. We just hear something break. He was like pouring or about to carry or something, this thing of, I don't exactly know what they keep sake in, but he dropped it. He's that shocked. No one comes for Hattori Hanzo for a sword anymore. That is simply not a thing that happens. That it is that shocking. And as soon as she says that, all pretense is gone, And a lot of misogynists hate when women put on an act and such. And obviously, part of the reason is women have to maneuver a world where, under patriarchy, there is a certain level of threat. They don't know what man is going to potentially become violent towards them. I've heard of, there are women who will, if a man tries to kiss them and they don't want to, they might hug him instead, and the man will walk away thinking, she likes me, when in reality it's that she really does not want to kiss him, and she knows that if she just stands around and says, we are not going to kiss right now, he might become physically violent, and she is not guaranteed that anyone will intervene. Kat Black did a fantastic video, I guess by now, years ago, about someone who was assaulted in front of a bunch of people and no one intervened. And even if it goes to court, she might not get justice. I mean, part of the problem is there is a certain percentage, and you can look this up. This is not, I'm not pulling this out of my ass. There is a certain percentage, which I would argue is entirely too high, of American cops, and I can imagine other countries as well, but America is the one where I know for sure, who are domestic abusers. And I'm not saying it's all of them, but there are some, and some of them it is known and they get away with it. Like, I feel like if you know that someone is a domestic abuser, you would not want them to have a badge and a gun. But that is what we're seeing here. She is not evil. By this point, we are, like, we appreciate, she's maybe more an anti-hero than an outright hero, but she's not evil. She's not doing this in order to, like, I feel like her sparing Nikki and even saying, you can come for me if you think that is justice, that you deserve revenge over me. That's perhaps the save the cat moment. If you wanted her to be an evil character, do I have to say it out loud? I feel uncomfortable saying it out loud. That scene could have ended in a way that was more geared towards evil actions. Let's go with that. And she's doing it because that is how driven she is to get revenge, and like, just watch the act she puts on. She's like, I know a few words, and then we find out, no, she speaks fluent Japanese, and the way, when she's asked to say more than one word, the first thing she says is, oh, did I already say that other one? Like, she knows that, she's getting him to lower his guard. She is using her feminine wiles to effectively maneuver a situation that she knows there's only one acceptable outcome for her. She is leaving with a sword with his permission. That is the only way that she can proceed. She needs Hattori Hanzo steel to carry out her revenge. And yeah, just so many little, and the thing about, how could you possibly, why would I help you? Because because the vermin I'm killing is a former student of yours, and he doesn't even utter the name, but he writes it. So there's no doubt. And that is, of course, also that there is, there are multiple cultures around the world that note the power that words can have, that if you say a word out loud, it has some power over you. And that can sometimes especially be the case if it is a name, perhaps especially a name of someone that you wish had no power over you. And note that as soon as he realizes, oh, this is about Bill, he says, you can sleep in here. It'll take me a month to make the sword. You can use that time to practice. There is no longer there's no sense of, he doesn't even say, like, make sure you keep the noise down because I do have a business to run. Like, there's just like, okay, you know what? You can stay here. I'll make you the sword. Absolutely no holding back. Nothing. Yeah. And I love the level of respect that the swords are treated with. And there's a sense of ritual when she's given the sword. And that's also when we see, and that's why I think, I appreciate that it might be culturally sensitive. I can't speak to that, but I do think it worked really well that we saw, the other guy who brings the tea, has for 30 years and wishes he was a general, but that would make Hattori Hanzo emperor. There's no sign of disrespect when he, like, look at how he talked to her, and like he got real up in her personal space before because he didn't really want to have to deal with her. And now where she's getting a sword, and that's a month's work from, he knew that Hattori Hanzo made swords, but he also knew that he was retired. He does not do this sort of thing anymore. He said, please email one of my students. I don't really do, mocap for fighting video games anymore. Is that a clear enough reference? I hope that's a clear enough reference. Ask me down below what I mean by any of that, if not. Anyway, yeah. And that's also something that I have to admit I did not really appreciate before this movie. But yeah, there are cultures where certain weapons have extreme value and must be treated with respect. I knew of it from, my father has told me about Greenlandic culture since I was old enough to understand words. So I knew that, the hunt can be very important. And sometimes part of that is the specific, thing you use to hunt. And to be clear, I'm only okay with hunting if it is simply the only way that I know some people make money off selling the meat, and that's their livelihood. And for some, it is the only way they can get food to eat for them and their family and other loved ones. If you hunt for sport, please find some other way to, yeah. Now, I think that does bring us to the, yes, I also think that it works really well the way that every so often someone will speak in a different language than English, and there's just subtitles, and the way that the different ones, I noticed that when when the tea bringer walks up to, in addition to getting all up in her face, he does not right away speak to her in American English. He talks to this visibly, like, I'm sorry, but if I saw someone who looked like Uma Thurman, my first thought would not be, she must speak fluent Japanese. Like, you're allowed, like, he works in hospitality, like, part of his job, and to be clear, I have the utmost respect for them. I'm saying that he's being, he's annoyed about, he wants to watch his fucking television show, but the, was this before TiVo? anyway, the he wants to he like he would be fine with if she was like made so uncomfortable that she just left. You know, he'll take the argument with Hattori, but he, as long as he can go back to watching his TV show, you know. But he walks up all in her personal space and asks something like, "What do you want?" or something along those lines, but not in English. So she doesn't even understand the words. She can just tell from his tone. He certainly, I'm not sure what I want, but I don't think he wants me here. But the you know, I mean, Hattori's first guess is that she's English. You know, he doesn't realize she's American until she says, but you know, she does not look like she necessarily speaks fluent Japanese, and you know, this is like a tourist kind of place. You know, they the fact that Hattori speaks such fluent English, you know, that is again something you find with people who work within tourism in countries. They speak, for example, English. It could also be other languages, but they certainly, a lot of them don't only speak their native tongue, the language that is, you know, most common to that part of the world. Anyway, I think so. Yeah, she gets the sword. I know it comes later, so I'm acknowledging that, but I'll put it here. I love the fact that the plane, you know, we see her make the kill list, and that's also a good way to, that's part of, you know, closing it out, because you know, we see Bud and Bill, and by that point we really don't know much about Bud, and the only thing we get in this movie of Bud is that woman deserves her revenge and we deserve to die, you know. And I think that's just enough. And it's also, I mean, with Michael Madsen, like, you don't need very much. Like, he could squint at you and you'd be like, I want to know more, you know. God, R.I.P. Absolute fucking legend. Now, the let's see, what was the other thing? Yeah, but the fact that you know, I saw years ago on IMDb Goofs, I don't even know if it's still around, but there was an incorrectly regarded as Goofs back then, at least, where someone noted, you know, yeah, like, usually you can't bring a sword on a plane, but she's not the only one with, you know, visually evident a sword there. They practically have a fucking cup holder for it, you know, like, this is a plane for former assassins hell-bent on revenge, like, clearly, you know. And I love, and it's not like, you know, you don't get the sense that, oh, this is just like a nothing, like nobody even knows about it. No, I mean, they've got like a stewardess, there's several other people on the plane. It doesn't look like it is just a nothing, and it's not, she's not the only person on the plane or anything. It's just, this is just, you know, in a world where someone can just, you know, survive what she survives and go on a murderous rampage for revenge. Yeah, you can fly certain air companies, whatever, they will just let you have the sword right there. You know, nobody makes a comment on it at all. Anyway, I think that does bring us to her talking about O-Ren, and sometimes I forget just how much of the movie is devoted to her. I think it's like 2/3 or so, from when we're first told, you know, okay, she's going to go after O-Ren now. And I love the fact that one of the very first images we see in this movie at all is actually that she crossed out the name O-Ren before Vernita. Or actually, oh, sorry, first images. It's right after she kills Vernita, I think. But yeah, that, you know, not everyone would have revealed that, and that also means that for the rest of the movie, we know for a fact by the end of, you know, by the end of their confrontation, you know, yeah, at some point, she will kill O-Ren, you know, and it affects how we think of their scenes. So very nicely done on that. You know, because throughout, like, we find ourselves, certainly I find myself thinking, how though, like, between the 88 and all these, you know, yeah. I guess this is a decent enough time to say, if I believed in fate, this would be, if I ever believed in, if there were moments in my life where I truly believed in fate, this would be one. Because I just recently finished, review is coming very soon. I just finished the 2016 Hitman game, and there is more than one reference to this movie, including the 88 in there, and it is as frequently as the case with the references in those games, fantastically done. I'm not spoiling when exactly. I think you might realize when it's going to happen before you even see. It's a so-called challenge in that game, which are similar to Steam achievements. Yeah. At least one of those challenges are that. And coincidentally, recently started playing a different game that reminds me of this one, which I don't think I want to mention by title yet, because I don't know. It might be a while before I'm able to do a video on it. I think it is long. Anyway, there is yeah, it was so we have the the anime, it's fantastic. Like it's so intense, and just like I barely know anything about the guy, but I hate him right away. The way that he's sitting there fucking laughing, he laughs so hard that he coughs about killing this guy. Just like so fucking disgusting, I mean, this man's partner, possibly wife, is right there, and he's laughing about her being widowed, and I mean, he knows that by the end of this situation she's going to be dead too. But yeah, the way that you feel the various like you can practically feel it on your own body when someone is cut or the like, and her hiding under the bed, and the way that whimper, and we hear it in the audio as well, and then she grabs it and pushes it back into her mouth. I love the way anime can visually express things that just like, I don't know that I can imagine anything that isn't either anime or heavily inspired by it that would do something like that. And it's the kind of thing, if this were a novel, you would have like a few, maybe more than a few, but lines that, it took every ounce of fiber in her body, but she managed to suppress the whimper, knowing that if she did not, she would die, something like that. But, and you could have had that as narration. The rest of the movie, every so often there's narration. But that wasn't what they wanted to do there, and it works so incredibly well. And then, the mother being stabbed to death on the bed, and the blade going through, and then the blood pools and starts dripping on her face, and it's just so fucked up. And we understand why this led her to become a killer. And once again, seeing, so she's 11, and she is just brutally fucking slaughtering this pedophile asshole. I'm sorry, fucking sue me, put me in jail, throw away the key. In fiction, I find that cathartic. I am not saying we should be doing that in the real world, but yeah. And then, in come the guards and shoot, and she's hiding under the bed, and, there is some exaggeration, but yeah, as far as I can tell, she's using a fucking Desert Eagle. Some of the injuries that she causes with it, they're not completely out of, that is a very high caliber. I believe it is the highest, or at least was for a while. I haven't kept up. It's been years since I studied weapons, but, I had a phase where I was really into games that had guns, and so I wanted to learn more about them. I have never wanted to own a gun in real life. Not that I'm not sure many Danes even own guns. Anyway, the our gun laws are much more restrictive than America's, thank God. And I think that is but yeah, and then we see also the part where she snipes a guy in a car, and again, like, immediately I just hate this guy. He's so creepy, and we just see the bullet and goes through, like, it's fucking sniper elite kind of bullet cam, and we just see the massive hole, and then we see they peek into the hole, and they're horrified. You know, we see blood on their faces. A lot of blood going on from one person onto another in this movie. And that brings us to the and she acknowledges the bride acknowledges in narration, and we have this visual flashback. The as we also get brief about, you know, there's the guy in the Kato mask. That's appreciated that reference. But the other than that, we have Gogo Yubari. I 100% understand why she was cast after, because apparently at least part of the reason was that Tarantino watched Battle Royale, and I'm not surprised that he loved that movie. It is fantastic, and it's right up his alley. I wouldn't necessarily have figured that she would be the one. I feel like there are other actresses in it that, but I do appreciate she is really, really great in that and in this. I do think she's even better here, but yeah. And we also and we have a couple of Star Trek references. You know, somehow I didn't mention, but I do appreciate the, you know, revenge is a dish best served cold is identified as an old Klingon proverb rather than, I forget who there's I used to know who said it originally, but obviously it's not Klingon, you know. Though if they were real, it would have been them. So fair enough. And I appreciate, I'm not saying that this movie made up the, let's see, is it Wrath of Khan, I think, is where we're told that in the Star Trek universe, it is considered a Klingon proverb. But in we also have the thing about, you know, that woman to Oren's right, who looks like a Star Trek villain, you know, which fair enough, yeah, she does. Good job on that. And fantastic performance by Julie Dreyfus. It is not easy. She has to speak multiple languages, and which I understand she does in reality as well. But I mean, already before they made the movie, but she really nails her performance. She also does not have that much of a screen time, but she has screen presence enough that we remember her. But yeah, you know, we get the thing about like how is someone who is, you know, American Chinese, you know, leader of the Yakuza, and apparently this is one of those cases where, see, I love when this happens, when someone makes a movie and they're like, oh, there's actually something here in the movie that needs to be a little bit different. I guess I'll go ahead and write and shoot something. And it fucking ends up being one of the best parts. Like the same thing happened with The Fog. You know, I think it was that the movie's running a little short or something along those lines. And then Carpenter wrote, if I recall correctly, it's like the opening scene, which is basically like a ghost story retelling of the legend. And like, I'm sorry, without that scene, I don't even think the movie completely works. You know, it is crucial. And apparently it wasn't even originally there at all. And it's just fucking, yeah. But, you know, Hitchcock, some of his best is also, you know, the... maybe it goes without saying, but one of the things I'm referring to is the shower scene in Psycho, the way that is filmed and edited. That was because of censorship. They were not allowed to show more than it does. And to this day, you will have people who watch that movie and swear that they saw something that demonstrably did not. Like, you can go frame by frame, and, you know, maybe, I guess if you have a DVD, I forget, does that still? I heard once that damages the disc, but maybe that's no longer the case. But anyway, you can go frame by frame. You truly didn't actually see that, but your mind made it, you know, it drew that connection. It put that connective tissue in there, you know. But yeah, originally he was not intending to cast an American Chinese actress, and then he realized, oh right, Lucy Liu, she's fucking awesome. And it's just, I love her in this role. She's so fucking good. And she actually, I read that there was an article that said that she was like the dragon lady stereotype, and she kind of hit back. And I am not qualified to speak on that, but I do think that goes to show that, you know, she at the very least at the time, I don't know if she's changed her mind since, but at the very least at the time, she felt like, no, this is right, you know. And yeah, just the entire scene, you know, the way the camera goes back and we see all these people partying and celebrating, and then the bride says, that guy's, you know, the guy who looks, I forget the exact wording, I'm not gonna, I would just butcher it. But yeah, that guy, that's Tanaka. And what he thinks is, and then we get it through, then he expresses it, And I really appreciated the fact that, the guys there are like, stop talking, Tanaka. You're, because this is a social faux pas, obviously. Is that what it's called? Sorry, foie gras. He's committing foie gras. Am I the only person who finds it? Maybe I should stop. I don't know. I just sometimes find it really funny to do malapropisms, but anyway. Yes, so note that when Oren steps in, the first thing she says is, let's hear him out. And that again is this traditionally feminine thing. They will help de-escalate, perhaps especially verbally, not exclusively. And then it is contrasted with her willingness to engage in murder. And that is a thing that, throughout this movie, you do have this contrast between traditional femininity and the, traditionally masculine violence and murder. If I recall correctly, I think that is something Schnee also gets into in his video on it. So once again, please watch that video as well. But yeah, as soon as he gets the words out his mouth, and then she takes action. And I love the way it's shot and edited, because we don't see her draw the sword, we don't see her jump onto the table, and she's apparently on the table by the time he's finished his sentence. There's no like breathing room in between. It just cuts directly from that to her feet, which I again appreciate Tarantino's foot fetish, but we just see her feet running across, and we see their heads like, what the fuck is happening? As they're watching her and then we see her swing the sword. We see the head flying through the air, and that's it. It's such a perfect way to show this exact sort of thing. And then her entire monologue there, where she underlines, hey, if you disagree with me, please let me know. I will persuade you. She doesn't say, you're with me or you're against me. She says, let me know if you disagree. I know I'm right, but I'll explain to you why I'm right. Which is, again, I feel like she, in that way, is similar to Bill. That's how he talked to Elle. But then, the entire last time, nothing is taboo, other than, of course, the topic which was just brought up. If you bring that back up, I collect your fucking head. Now, and then the last part where she's like shouting, and it's just, oh my god, the energy. She's so... 30 seconds ago, she was like soothing. She was like, no, let's hear him out. He has something on his mind. What's troubling you? And then she's shouting, if any of you assholes have anything to say, now's the fucking time. Just, yeah. And that's enough. We understand, because the people who work at the restaurant fucking terrified of her and the 88. Sorry. No, I'm not using I appreciate that that's not their full name. I'm just going to call them the 88. And yeah, we understand why. Because, I mean, if she's willing to cut the head off Boss Tanaka, what the fuck is she going to do to these people who work at a restaurant? Like, that's not, like, status-wise, which is, again, bringing up the power hierarchy here. And, yeah, the entire... I somehow forget, when a long enough time passes between two viewings, like, genuinely, I think it's like almost 30 minutes we spend in the restaurant there at the end, and somehow it never gets boring. And it is not super typical for Tarantino to spend quite that long in one location, outside of the ones where it's like, Hateful Eight, not super many locations in that one, so I'm not going to give away exactly how many. And yeah, we have the music. I think it's called Battle Without Honor and Humanity, which everyone was fucking listening to at the time, and there were a bunch of parodies. Yeah, and oh right, the Gogo Yubari flashback, I definitely can't help but notice that this is a character that they specify is 17, and the camera is not shy about the fact that her legs are bare. She is, a Japanese schoolgirl, which I understand some adult men find appealing, which it's one of those things of like, listen, if you are the same age, I mean, don't exoticize other people regardless, but, yeah, like hypothetically, if you are a Japanese schoolboy of, very similar age, yeah, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being attracted to her, or if you yourself are a schoolgirl, but this being packaged for a part, yeah, an audience, part of which, a significant chunk of which is white, because Tarantino's fan base, a lot of white people in there, well, a lot of cishet white men. So I think what he is trying to do, because he's always contrasting it against her violence. She's at the bar, she's getting drunk, calling Ferrari shit, and then, the guy didn't even bring it up, but, it's in the air. Like, clearly that is where his head's at. She brings up the idea of them having sex, and then she says, you didn't penetrate me, I penetrated you. So her being perceived in any kind of sexual way is always, yeah, there and later is contrasted with her lethality and her brutality. She's not just someone who kills, because she could have done it in a less brutal way. I mean, she cuts his fucking stomach open and the guts spill out on the floor, and then she laughs, Later, when she's walking down the stairs, she's got that weapon in her hand, so the framing is showing both. It could have chosen to show just one, but it is very deliberate in having both very visual. One thing is that she could have held it up to her head, for example, then we'd be seeing her face in that, rather than legs, which, yeah. A lot of people perceive a woman's bare legs, especially if she's wearing a skirt or something, as inherently sexual. I'm not going to comment further on that, but just that's why I'm, and it's very, very frequent in media made here in the West for that to be the implication. If they don't want us to think about that, they will film it in a way where we can't see that the legs are bare, even if we already know that presumably they are. But yeah, so yeah, there you have that. You can also have a close-up of the weapon instead of showing the legs. So I definitely think that he is trying to do something there. I don't personally think that it really makes up for, like, one thing is they could have just have her be 18. They didn't have to have her be a schoolgirl at all, because she is a warrior. It is, again, this, the thing is, a lot of men will say that a woman is at her most feminine at that basic age. So it is, again, bringing up femininity, contrasting it, traditional femininity, contrasting it with the traditional masculine violence that they are engaging in. I think it works for the bride, as much as, again, I'm not saying it's okay. I leave that determination to female feminists, but I definitely don't think that with Go-Go, I get what he's going for. I find it uncomfortable. I don't think that it completely makes up for, because listen, at the end of the day, yeah, the characters in the movie, if they flirt with her, she might disembowel them. Do you think that's going to put off every pedophile that's watching the movie? Because I don't. I doubt it. I wish that I could believe that, but some of the characters that are the most lusted after, I'm not saying that's exclusively, when it comes to pedophiles, but some of the characters in media most lusted after are sometimes the most brutally violent, including the ones who kill people very close to them. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's so cool that Oren somehow fucking senses, like, it's practically like this supernatural thing. Somehow she sensed that the bride was there and throws the thing, and then Gogo goes, and the bride is above her, and we can tell, like, oh, it's not, she's not gonna be able to hang up there forever. Just yeah, and the acting, I'm afraid I forget her name, but the actress who plays Gogo, who's also brilliant in Battle Royale, you know, the her eyes, like she's trying to figure out, you know, what. I mean, there's no one here right now. That's, you know, there's not really anything else we can do. And the tracking shot, the Brian De Palma thing in the restaurant, as it follows her, and we see, you know, above we see the kitchen, I think it is, and just, yeah, so fucking cool. And the 5, 6, 7, 8's amazing. I 100% understand why he fell in love with their music. And it is super fucking cool that they actually appear in the, you know, the delete, not delete scene. The DVD has the full performance, I think, of their song, and it's edited to, you know, some of it is just them playing, some of it is them playing, some of it is the crowd there dancing, but evidently they did perform that entire song on set at least once, you know, even though we don't hear, oh right, sorry, it's not the song that we hear. I forget if we hear more than one, but we hear at least one where we hear more of it than this one. But it's yeah, that was also famous. I think it was used in a car commercial around the same time or something along those lines. Anyway, the yeah, so the detail that the 88, it's because in Hitman 2016 it's not 88, it's 8. Anyway, the 88, you know, are not treating these, you know, hospitality workers particularly well, which again really speaks to, and Oren lets them, you know, as polite as she was to the bosses, this is how she treats people that she does not have to work with, because there's nothing that these hospitality workers can do to her but the bosses she has to have a working relationship with. And again, that is very telling. The bride is as nice as can be expected to anyone who is not engaging in evil behavior. Look at how she talks to Nikki. Think about how much pain it causes her to see Nikki, both before and after she kills Vernita, you know, basically in front of Nikki. And yet, the way she talks to her, you know, she's not, she's doing what she can to make it, to have Nikki understand, and also to make it clear, listen, if you want revenge, I'll be waiting, you know. Anyway, I think that does cover the, but yeah, you know, and they did do a good job of making him look like Charlie Brown. You know, I think it's especially the, like, the bald head, the color of his clothes, and then the specific, the symbol, whatever it's called, you know, on his clothes. And Oren also refers to him as Charlie Brown, and the I think wife of him also says, yes, he looks like Charlie Brown, you know, because she knows that this is, you know. And there was also that thing about, they talk about what they're afraid of would happen if, but yeah. And then you know, before we see it, we see the bride sneak up, and we get another, I really like when Tarantino does the, you know, we see something and it's, oh, we kind of like to see what's behind it. Well, let's just do a fade, and then now we can see through it. It's X-ray vision. What's the big deal? Like, we don't need to justify it or something. People accept it. I've met many people who watch Tarantino movies. Not all of them loved him. I've yet to hear someone say, ugh, I fucking hate when he does the X-ray vision. But yeah, you know, off screen, she grabs the Julie Dreyfus character, whose name escapes me at the moment, and yeah, she shouts out, you know, calls out, and yeah, you know, show her she means business by chopping the fucking arm off, you know. And yeah, I I fucking love the way that this, because like by the end she's taken out maybe, I don't know, a couple dozen, maybe 2 dozen or something, maybe more, of all these 88s. And the way that, yeah, you know, does it start with 1 or is it 2 at first? It certainly starts small, and then, you know, at first, yeah, she takes out just the small group that was there, and then we, you know, not long after we hear the engines, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, they're called the 88. Of course, there's more of them. She just doesn't bring all of them every time, you know. Oh, the driving was also super cool, and her in the, you know, the same outfit as was worn famously by Bruce Lee. So really, really cool there. And okay, I'll just very briefly note that in Hitman 2016, as mentioned, there's at least one Kill Bill reference, and one reference they make is, instead of the bride, because in that game you play as a man, it's the groom. So that's yeah. Anyway, the yes, you see the, yeah, and Oren's face as she, you know, she realizes, you know, and I think, yes, I think as soon as she hears the voice, I think she recognizes it. And then the thing about, you know, are there any more, you know, underlings for me to take on? And then go. And I do think, I do appreciate the way that they do play up, you know, yeah, she has this schoolgirl thing. I mean, the way she like waves and says hi, I mean, I'm fucking reminded of, god damn it, I don't remember the character's name, but you know, the second Deadpool movie has a character who has this, you know, really positive, chipper energy kind of thing. Just yeah, if I was an expert on anime, I believe there is a specific term in Japanese for the, you know, optimistic, happy, young female character in anime. Anyway, yeah, and so fucking cool. I have no idea what the thing is called, but I am terrified of it. It's so fucking cool looking. And the way they get a lot out of it, you know, sometimes like just seeing, you know, Bride sword drawn and Go-Go swinging it, and then she like launches it, and at one point, you know, Bride ducks, but then when she pulls it back, it hits her in the back. There's a point where it goes through a table and tears it in half, you know, table being used to block it, to protect. And there's isn't there a point where she like turns her back on and then swings, you know, throws it backwards? Like, it's so fucking cool. I know it's not quite the same as in Nunchaku, but it's the kind of thing where it has that high level of flexibility compared to, you know, yeah, something that you just strike directly with, that you can't swing in any kind of way, you know. And yeah, the fact that she does hit, like at one point she hits Bride in the chest and Bride goes flying back, like, god damn. And then she like triggers a thing so that like these like saw blades come out of it. God damn, that's fucking cool. And yeah, so by the end, you know, there's the part where Bride gets, I think it's one of the broken table legs, and there's like nails, and she just fucking stabs. And I'm sorry, I feel quite confident in saying there's at least some damage to the toes, and we have all, at some point or another, stubbed a toe. Imagine having a fucking nail driven through it. God damn. And then she, you know, hits it into the side, like the temple, I think it's called, and blood pours out of the eyes. It's so fucking cool. Like, yeah, again, something I've yet to meet someone who forgot about that scene. They might have forgotten so many other things about it, but they remember that visual, you know. And I think that might bring us to the yeah, so fucking cool when she's fighting a bunch of 88s. I love the part where, that's again, you know, Tarantino giving us a breather. Like, there's the part where she's standing, she's completely surrounded. Like, they're 100% circle around her, and she's got the sword, and she's using it to the reflective, yeah, to see, you know, to get a good idea of exactly where they are. And then they're just like swinging swords and attacking each other, and she's chopping off limbs, and it's just the whole, so fucking cool. And yeah, some of it's black and white for censorship. I forget if I read once if the silhouette part was also always intended to be silhouette, because it does look fucking cool. Like, it's really striking visually, you know. But yeah, and then and it is a clever conceit that the person, flips lights on and off, to explain why it is. And then when she flips the lights on, the bride is like, "I'm sorry. Do you need your mother? Is your babysitter anywhere around here? Because this is not. I'm not. She's not. She's not going to kill this child. I realize it's not literally a child, but to her, this is. And then again, the mother coming up in her, and she destroys the sword by chopping it in parts, and then she spanks him and says, "This is what happens when you play with the yakuza. Go home to your mother." And he runs up and he's like wiping away tears. Like, just, it's a great little moment, and that again is like, yeah, sometimes, not every, a lot of people who ended up in a situation like that, they started out, way too young to be in that kind of environment, and they just stayed there and eventually started doing really awful things. And I'm not saying that this exact move or maneuver would help in the real world, but it's nice to imagine that sometimes it could be resolved like that, maybe. And yeah, then it is her versus O-Ren, and I love the part where she just opens the doors and we just see this gorgeous, the natural beauty, and then also the building parts. And I love the part where it cuts to the little water mill thing, I think it's called, um, which I think I read somewhere is a reference to, the Seven Samurai. That's awesome. God, I gotta watch that movie again. Anyway, in general, if you have not, I'm gonna make absolutely sure that I get his name right. So his name is Akira Kurosawa, and if you haven't already watched, he's an absolute genius. I think my favorite that I've watched is probably, oh my god, can I seriously not remember what it's called? Okay, I swear I won't take forever to remember. Rashomon. Absolutely fucking love that. And it's very cool that that's been, there are other, yeah, there are various stories since, including here in the West, that have heavily referenced it. And I think my overall favorite is probably Hoodwinked 1. Anyway, yeah, that entire fight is also awesome. I love the thing about, the steel never tires, but you might. I hope you saved your energy or you won't last 5 minutes. And in the IMDb trivia, it's noted the fight does indeed last. Like, it's very close to the end. It is indeed 5 minutes that have passed. So yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, I love that is like easily the most personal sword fight. Obviously the Vernita fight is also very personal in the entire movie, and the way that, again, they very much fight in order to win. And that's where we get the thing I described in the spoiler review of, she slices the bride's back and then the bride turns around and you do see a little bit of blood. I think they might have put a thing there that could pump a little bit of blood, or maybe they just put so much there that even after a couple of seconds of filming, it would still be running. By the way, fantastic work by Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger. And yeah, I do really love, as wonderfully ridiculous as it is, she does realize that really was Hattori Hanzo's deal. She can just tell from the way that it cut her. And the image of the blood dirtying the otherwise pure snow, fantastic. And I think that pretty much gets us to I like her saying, your limbs belong to me now. And then we have, she gets information out of Julie Dreyfus' character, and then her character says to Bill, and she's very scared, but Bill is like, and I love the line, I want him to know what I know, and I want him to know that I know he knows. And yeah, the fucking, this, I guess stinger is appropriate, of, does she know that her daughter is still alive? I remember walking out of the theater being like, oh my God, I have to watch part 2, volume 2, that there have been part 1s where I was like, I don't know if this is really all then that they had to offer the first time. Sometimes it's like, if that really wasn't enough for, you didn't need to make this multiple parts. This needed to, it didn't need to be 2 parts, but it needed to be, I wouldn't necessarily cut anything from this or the second part. And I understand back then there might not have been the patience for, Anyway, I think that pretty much covers everything. I've been talking for about twice as long as the movie runs. And yeah, let's see, is there anything I wanted to make sure to say before ending the video? I think there is a, let's see. So there's the, no, yeah, I think everything else, because there's, yeah. So the, yeah, I think that over the course of the movie, they do a good job of exploring different ways that misogynistic men under patriarchy hurt women. And these are things that sometimes happen in the real world, and way too often people actually get away with, so there is some catharsis in seeing the bride. That's the thing. Sometimes when you have a member of a minority, doing something in a piece of media, they kind of end up essentially representing every member of that minority. And I'm not saying that's unproblematic, but certainly I think that is what he's trying to do here. Whether or not that is right is something I leave for female feminists to judge. And yeah, I think that does cover everything. So yeah, really wonderful to get to watch this again. I must have watched it half dozen times, maybe more, and it just never seems to get old. But yeah, I did also appreciate, for the various languages that she speaks, that Julie Dreyfus character specifically chooses when she is insulting the bride. And that was also like some of what she said, like, Jesus fucking Christ. She chooses French, which I'm reliably informed is the best language to swear in. It is, I don't know why I made him German. You know what? No accent. I cannot do a French accent right now. Whatever. It's like wiping your ass with silk.